Chapter 501. Action. Nathan shook himself out of his reverie and refocused on the skill panel. Beyond the 2 ninjutsu he'd already perfected and the 3 he'd just copied, the 2 most significant techniques were the Shadow Clone technique and the Palm Immortal technique. He'd funneled the 20,000 chakra points freed up by mastering the Heart Connecting technique into the Shadow Clone technique, dramatically accelerating its proficiency gain. At present, it stood at level 5, 4,109 or 5,000, only 810 points shy of level 6. In total, Nathan had invested 35,000 chakra points into this technique, yielding more than 230 proficiency points per day. At that rate, it would take just over 3 days, definitely fewer than 4, to achieve the next rank. Once the Shadow Clone technique reached level 6, Nathan was confident he could, in tandem with his level 5 wind style, Wind Wings, split a Shadow Clone while flying. Such a maneuver would unquestionably enhance his mobility and versatility in combat. Of course, even if the experiment failed, it wouldn't derail his progress. There was always room for further refinement. Nathan's mastery of wind-style Wind Wings currently stands at level 5, with 3,995 out of 5,000 proficiency points. Since he invests 20,000 chakra points into it every day, he gains roughly 235 proficiency points daily. In just over 4 more days, he'll hit level 6, and once he does, combined with his level 6 Shadow Clone technique, he'll have no trouble reaching his goal. Aside from the Shadow Clone technique, Nathan has also been working on the Palm Fairy technique. Over the past week, he's gained more proficiency than expected under his usual physical strengthening regimen. The reason is clear. He's been shouldering some of the medical ninja's duties, treating the wounded, and picking up expertise in the process. That extra practice has improved both his chakra scalpel and his skin extraction technique. The latter now sits at level 6 with 3,100 out of 10,000 points, still a long way from level 7, but progress nonetheless. The chakra scalpel had just hit level 6, 9,200 versus 10,000, only 1 step shy of level 7. Although A-rank medical ninjutsu isn't capped at level 7, reaching that tier would be a major breakthrough. At that point, Nathan might not even need to activate its ceiling. He could deploy it directly in battle. Any technique that boosts his combat effectiveness deserved priority, so he resolved to siphon off a portion of the chakra he harvested from the Mist Ninja and funnel it straight into the scalpel to speed up its mastery. He pushed that thought aside and scrolled through his other skills. None demanded urgent attention. They were all advancing steadily under his current training regimen. The only exceptions were a few freshly copied ninjutsu that had piqued his interest. Nathan hadn't deliberately supplied them with chakra, yet they'd grown slightly on the residual energy he'd overlooked. He didn't intend to allocate any more of his reserves to them. Instead, he'd keep them alive with whatever leftover chakra he plundered. Nathan sat back and surveyed the data on his holo display one last time. He'd just finished summarizing their recent gains and plotting out the next phase of training. With a quiet tap, the panel winked out. Leaning forward, he pressed his palms to the tabletop and pushed himself upright. His gaze drifted to the narrow window beside him. Outside, the night sky stretched vast and ink-black, a single brilliant moon suspended overhead. Its pale light spilled into the room in silvery shafts, dancing across the smooth floor. Nathan allowed himself a moment to drink in the stillness before duty called again. A soft knock at the door broke the hush. "Come in," he called, blinking back to attention. The door swung open with a low creak, and Kobayashi Shunji slipped inside. Shunji was one of Nathan's most trusted ninjas, a calm, precise operator whose disciplined bearing made him the perfect second-in-command. "Captain," Shunji reported in a clipped tone, "everyone's assembled and ready." "Natha," En gave a curt nod. He'd ordered all hands to be up before dawn, so the timing was perfect. He let his gaze drift over the darkened room. No bags to pack, no gear to sift through. Since arriving on this front, he'd worn his battle attire non-stop. Lightweight armor, tactical boots, and the kit he kept strapped to his back. "Good," Nathan said, slipping his gloves on with smooth efficiency. "Let's move out." With that, he rose and headed for the door, his silhouette framed by the moonlight. Shunji followed silently, and together they stepped into the corridor, joining the rest of the team as the first light of morning began to tinge the horizon. Nathan halted at the rally point and surveyed his brigade, dozens of Konoha shinobi standing in neat rows beneath the moonlight, each waiting for his next order. He felt a knot tighten in his gut. How many of them would still be standing by dawn? Tonight's mission was a twofold affair. The true goal, a decapitation strike deep into Kirigakure's command, would be executed by the veteran Jonin. But first, they needed a diversion. Chunin and Genin would launch a full-scale assault to draw enemy attention and forces away from the real target. They weren't meant to conquer territory or annihilate the Mist's lower ranks. They were meant to bleed the enemy dry in the spotlight. Meanwhile, the top Jonin would remain in reserve, unseen and ready to strike when Kirigakure's defenses were stretched thin. Nathan knew the risk all too well. With the less experienced shinobi taking the brunt of the fighting, casualties would be heavy. He looked back over his line of soldiers, their faces set but tense. "By tomorrow night," he whispered, "I don't know how many of you will still be alive." Nathan glanced down at the Chunin, still unaware of the full situation. He shook his head to clear his thoughts, then turned to Lieutenant Shunji Kobayashi at his side. "Form up and advance on Yujin Port. Move out at once." "Understood, Captain." Kobayashi snapped to attention, then paused, a look of alarm crossing his face. "Sir, do you really mean to attack Kirigakure's base at Abaratsu Port?" Every shinobi present knew the reputation of Abaratsu. After breaching this very stronghold, Kirigakure had entrenched themselves here, using it as a bridgehead to push into the Land of Fire. The defenses were legendary, layers of walls and watchtowers, traps buried around the perimeter, patrols circling without rest. A frontal assault would be nothing short of suicide. A murmur ran through the ranks. Faces turned to Nathan, seeking explanation. Even Kobayashi's confident posture wavered. Yet Nathan's expression remained calm and resolute, betraying no hint of doubt. Nathan hesitated at first. He didn't want to say more, but he knew his men's morale depended on at least a hint of explanation. "This operation won't involve only our brigade," he admitted. "Other Allied forces on the battlefield will coordinate with us." He gave no further details about the true objective, storming the Kirigakure base camp, and for good reason. The mission was classified at the highest level. Not even veteran Jonin like Shunji Kobayashi, who hadn't been assigned to the decapitation squad, were cleared for the full picture. That's why Kobayashi had looked so startled when Nathan's order dropped. Nathan met Kobayashi's gaze and said simply, "Execute the order, Jonin Kobayashi." Instantly, Kobayashi snapped to attention. "Yes, Captain." Nathan's brief explanation hadn't erased every question, but orders are orders. As the team's commanding officer, once he issued a directive, his subordinates had no choice but to carry it out, even if they didn't fully understand why. Kobayashi Junji swallowed his doubts, squared his shoulders, and turned to the men and women around him. "All right, everyone. Yujin Port is our objective. Move out." In an instant, the unit sprang into motion. Across the battlefield, dozens of squads, large and small, answered the same call. Advance on Yujin Port. After all, as the old proverb warns, if you want to strike a snake, aim for the 7-inch mark. To ensure their decapitation operation succeeded, they would have to neutralize the Kirigakure base at Atsuzu Port first. Chapter 502, Transportation Experience, had proven that Kirigakure's defenses around Yujin Port were far more formidable than Nathan and his team had imagined. Although they'd gone out of their way over the past few days to skirt every patrol they'd once clashed with, they'd still been spotted before they got within striking distance. It wasn't just them. Reports trickled in from Allied cells, each one stalled or repelled well short of the docks. Nathan paused on a mossy ridge and listened. Faint echoes of battle drifted on the wind. He squared his shoulders. "It's time," he murmured. "We move to Phase 2. Lieutenant Shunji Kobayashi approached, face drawn with worry. "Captain," he said in a low voice, "we've got more fog ninjas converging on our position by the minute. Shall we press on?" Since their exposure, Nathan had refused every suggestion to fall back. He was as relentless as a man with a single, unshakable purpose to take Yujin Port. Kobayashi and the others had warned him again and again. Was it worth the risk? But Nathan met Kobayashi's anxious gaze and, without a flicker of doubt, shook his head. "We continue," he replied simply. As night's gray light deepened around them, the men readied their weapons. The distant clash of steel and shouts grew louder, an ominous reminder that Kirigakure sentries were closing in. Nathan turned to his squad, steeled by determination. "Formation Alpha," he ordered. "Keep your lines tight. We hit them before they know what's coming." With that, they slipped into the mist and surged forward toward Yujin Port's iron gates. Step 2 of the plan was all about sowing confusion on the battlefield. Once our strike team could no longer advance on Abaratsu Port, we would halt, dig in, and engage the Mist Village ninjas directly, drawing their full attention. Only then could the Konoha Jonin move in, under cover of chaos, and carry out the beheading operation. And now, the signal had come. Nathan gave a curt nod. Kobayashi Shunji exhaled and barked orders. Split into small squads. Established defensive positions immediately, exactly as we discussed. Behind them, the other Leaf Shinobi fanned out. No sooner had they formed ranks than the Mist Ninjas surged forward, blades gleaming in the dim light. The clash erupted in a flurry of steel and chakra. At the heart of the melee, Nathan remained deceptively calm. From his pouch he drew a single kunai, its blade sheathed in a delicate protective seal. Etched along the hilt were 4 characters, the sword of shinobi love. His breath caught for just a moment. This was the very kunai marked by Namikaze Minato himself. Clutching the weapon, Nathan readied himself for the fight ahead. It had only been a short while since Nara Kaimitsu slipped him the briefing scroll. From its contents, Nathan was now sure of one thing. Namikaze Minato would soon arrive on this battlefield. And with that certainty came another chilling realization. Every recent security breach in the camp had been orchestrated by Uchiha Madara and his confederates. Their aim was clear: lure Minato into Konoha's beheading operation, then strike at Nohara-Rin to force Uchiha Obito into awakening the Mangekyo Sharingan, and on Madara's predetermined path. Nathan had no desire to become a pawn in their scheme, so he said nothing. He simply planted himself on a nearby ridge, eyes sweeping the chaotic front line. Each movement of the rival Kirigakure Jonin, each rustle of chakra in the shadows, told him they were close to launching their trap. Now he only needed one more piece to fall into place: Minato's timely arrival. He did not wait long. As the mist-enshrouded Jonin across the valley gathered their weapons and prepared to advance, a slender figure materialized in a swirl of golden light. Namikaze Minato, forever known as the Yellow Flash, stood poised at the edge of the clearing. Even Nathan's own reputation as the Ghost Sword paled beside the raw intensity of Minato's presence. The moment those cerulean eyes surveyed the field, dozens of opponents stiffened, chakra crack, ling in alarm. The game was about to begin. Namikaze Minato spared only a cursory glance for the battlefield's chaos. Ignoring the frantic chatter around him, he offered a single nod to Nathan. Grasping Nathan's shoulders, he activated the Flying Thunder God technique once more. In a brilliant flash, the two of them vanished. Even in their absence, the Konoha shinobi held fast. There was no risk of a collapse in morale or leadership. Jonin Kobayashi Shunji waited nearby, ready to assume full command, and additional squad leaders were already en route. This contingency had been arranged at dawn by Nara Kimitsu, who'd kept every detail under strict wraps. He refused to stand by and watch a whole generation of genin be cut down unprotected. As Minato and Nathan disappeared, support teams from the Yamanaka and Nara clans moved into position. Working in pairs, they would either leap into the fray directly or coordinate the battle remotely through the clan's telepathy jutsu. Their singular mission: reduce casualties among Konoha's mid- and lower-ranked ninja as much as possible. This is Konoha. No other village could pull off a maneuver like this. Minato Namikaze's gaze settled on Nathan, just as the world around him rippled with spatial distortion. In an instant, Nathan found himself standing in a new, unfamiliar place. He swept his eyes across the terrain, already cataloging landmarks and exit routes in his mind. Minato let out a quiet sigh as he watched. Anyone else would have felt nauseated or disoriented after being yanked through a space-time rupture by the Flying Thunder God technique. But Nathan displayed zero discomfort, not even a hint of dizziness. That alone told Minato everything he needed to know. Nathan's nervous system was operating on a level far beyond that of a typical jonin. And it made sense. Nathan's physical attributes had been honed to their peak, and with his newly awakened Mangekyo Sharingan, his reaction speed outstripped ordinary shinobi by leagues. Minato recalled their first encounter on the rainy battlefield in the Land of Rain. Back then, Nathan's Sharingan only bore 3 tomoe, and the teleport had left him off balance, forcing Ichika to catch him as he tumbled. That moment was gone. Now Nathan stood steady and alert, every muscle coiled and ready. Minato nodded to himself. This mission would be different. Nathan not only sensed the usual pull of chakra as he teleported, he could now actually feel the fluctuations of space itself. Until recently, that would have been impossible. Before entering the sealing array, his spatial awareness was weak, and his reflexes too slow. The teleportation happened so quickly, there simply wasn't time to notice anything. But now, with his Mangekyo Sharingan awakened, Nathan's nerve response had sharpened dramatically. He could perceive every subtle distortion in the void. From this, he drew a clear conclusion. If someone granted him proper instruction in the Flying Thunder God technique, he would be able to learn it. Sadly, the Flying Thunder God is an S-rank forbidden jutsu, far from easy to procure. And what about copying it from Namikaze Minato with the Sharingan's fabled copying ability? That was virtually unthinkable. Even if the Sharingan could replicate an S-level forbidden technique, Minato's mastery had become so refined that the actual hand seals and movements were almost imperceptible. Without seeing the exact motions, how could Nathan possibly duplicate the jutsu? Nathan watched Minato closely, realizing he couldn't simply ask the Hokage to demonstrate the technique at leisure. If Minato genuinely wanted to help him, Nathan might have just requested pointers on what else to emulate. But that luxury was out of reach. Even if the 7th Hokage was willing to teach him, the elders of the village would never approve. The Flying Thunder God technique was a forbidden jutsu, sealed away in the village archives. Minato couldn't casually hand it over to a student. If I'm going to learn this, I'll have to find another path, Nathan thought, already formulating a plan in the back of his mind. Now wasn't the time to dwell on the details, though. He banished all distraction and refocused on Minato. The Hokage gave him a single, knowing nod, no words, as though the moment of hesitation had never occurred. Then, in the blink of an eye, Minato activated his trademark technique and disappeared. Nathan felt the familiar ripple of chakra around him as Minato teleported away. He noted the subtle change in his own energy. This short-range leap was clearly no great burden on the 7th Hokage. As the air settled, Nathan squared his shoulders. He might not learn the Flying Thunder God technique through official channels, but he refused to give up. A new resolve ignited within him. If the village wouldn't teach him, he would find another way. Because this technique uses so little chakra, its cost is negligible, at least when compared to Minato Namikaze's immense reserves. An average shinobi would bleed dry long before mastering it. After all, Minato is Sage Mode qualified. His chakra pool simply dwarfs that of ordinary ninjas. Nathan let these thoughts settle as he glided his gaze to the right, where a cluster of silent figures stood. He hadn't heard a word from them until now. Who were they? Had Minato sent them, or had they slipped in on their own? Either way, several strangers had gathered here beside him. Chapter 503, Powerful Lineup. Under the pale light of midnight, Nathan spotted a small squadron of figures standing perfectly still. Each wore a high-collared windbreaker, zipped to the chin, and dark sunglasses that caught what little moonlight filtered through the trees. Their calm, almost eerie composure told him at once whom he was looking at, the Aburame clan, Konoha's legendary insect masters. As one of the village's founding families, the Aburame were renowned not only for their power, but for an unsettling air of mystery. Nathan had seen the stories, Aburame Shino among the famed 12 young lions, and now these silent warriors before him. Even the least experienced among them held the rank of special jonin, while the tallest, most imposing figure in the center was unmistakably the current clan leader, Aburame Shiwei. Nathan had committed every detail of these ninjas to memory long ago. Their straight posture, the precise cut of their windbreakers, the ever-present calm that seemed to swallow sound itself. There was no mistaking them. As if drawn by his scrutiny, Shiwei finally turned her head and met his gaze. Even behind those mirrored lenses, Nathan felt the weight of her eyes upon him. Nathan could feel her eyes on him, even behind those dark sunglasses. After a few seconds of silent appraisal, Jiwei gave a slow nod. "Excellent," she said softly. "That's exactly the style befitting the Yu Nu clan." Nathan allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. What he didn't know was that beneath Jiwei's calm exterior, a storm was brewing. The weaker something is, the more acutely it senses danger, and the parasitic insects the Yu Nu clan keeps are unmatched detectors of threat. It was precisely this talent that many members of her clan relied on to size up an opponent. The moment Jiwei reached out with her senses, her insects shrieked an urgent warning, danger of a magnitude she had only ever encountered in a handful of people, and those were names she knew all too well. Surprised, she shook her head and suppressed her alarm. She couldn't be certain, yet her instincts screamed that Nathan was far more formidable than he'd ever let on. Nathan's true power was beyond question. He had already demonstrated strength far surpassing what any ninja his age should possess. Yet, remarkably, the Aburame clan's parasite bugs gave no sign of alarm. That could only mean one thing. Nathan was holding back a huge portion of his abilities. The thought sent a shiver through Aburame Jiwei. Silently, Jiwei whispered an order into the secret channel he shared with his teammates via the bugs. "Keep a close eye on Nathan. If anything goes wrong, fall back to him." The other shinobi received the subtle signal. Their gazes flickered toward Nathan, discreet but unmistakable. Of course, Nathan caught their attention, but he didn't mind. For now, they were on the same side, allies in this mission, and posed him no threat. Even if any of them harbored ill intentions, he wasn't worried. In the ninja world, power spoke louder than suspicion. As long as his fists and his chakra remained stronger than anyone's, Nathan knew he could handle whatever came at him. Lost in these thoughts, he barely registered the soft crunch of footsteps approaching until two figures stepped into view. Their silhouettes, backlit by the fading light, breathed new tension into the clearing and signaled that the real battle was about to begin. Nathan barely had time to steady himself when Minato Namikaze reappeared, this time flanked by another shinobi. Nathan instantly recognized the newcomer, Uchiha Shisui, summoned from the Blackstone base to reinforce their forces. Nathan's eyes narrowed as he studied Shisui. The Uchiha's gaze was bleary, as if still reeling from the spatial rift that had delivered them here. That single clue was enough. Shisui had not yet unlocked his Mangekyo Sharingan. His unique dojutsu, the Koto Amatsukami, an ability to subtly reshape a person's will, had evidently become active instead, reacting to the widening rift between clan loyalty and age duty. It had perceived an impending split and awakened prematurely. But in the midst of this all-out war, who had the luxury to ponder the finer points of ocular jutsu? Without full visual clarity, Shisui would feel no psychic backlash, and so his Sharingan remained untransformed. As these thoughts flickered through Nathan's mind, he offered Shisui a curt nod. Before he could say another word, Minato vanished once more into the ether. One by one, shinobi both familiar and unknown materialized around them. Reinforcements continued to pour in through the spatial gateway, swelling their small circle into a throng of warriors. With each new arrival, Nathan felt an uneasy tension tighten in his chest. This gathering was far larger and far more ominous than he had ever imagined. Nathan realized he had seriously underestimated the resolve of Hiruzen Sarutobi and the other village elders. This time, Konoha had truly gone all in. Leading the charge was the head of the Aburame clan, but bringing up the rear were the chiefs of the Inuzuka, Yuki, Yuhi, Yamanaka, Nara, Akimichi, Hyuga, Uchiha, and every other major family in the village. Each clan had brought its finest shinobi, forming an undeniably formidable force. Just seeing them assembled made Nathan appreciate how monumental a feat it was to pull so many elite fighters from the front lines without destabilizing the rest of the war effort. No wonder it had taken so long. Still, Nathan couldn't help but question the cost. To teleport this many high-level shinobi at once, Konoha had tapped a tremendous amount of chakra drawn directly from its own greatest defender, Minato Namikaze. Nathan glanced at Minato and felt it instantly. The Hokage's chakra reserves had plunged to less than a quarter of what they'd been just minutes ago. Shadow level or not, Weakening Minato so drastically in the midst of battle carried risks of its own. Yet here they all were, ready to join the fight. Even for someone who had mastered the Flying Thunder God technique, teleporting so many times in rapid succession still exacted a heavy toll on his chakra reserves. Yet Minato Namikaze had managed to leap in close, cutting the distance almost to nothing. Had he been any farther away, he'd have been exhausted before he even arrived, and that makes his performance all the more remarkable. Nathan surveyed the enemy ranks, about 50 shinobi in total. These were no mere grunts, but a strike force bristling with above-average jonin, the weakest among them an exceptionally talented chunin. A formation like this could tear through Kirigakure's front lines in minutes. According to their battlefield intel, there was no one here capable of matching Minato's speed and power. It was a classic trade-off. They'd sacrificed some individual strength for overwhelming numbers. As Nathan finished his assessment, Minato Namikaze suddenly clapped his hands, drawing every eye toward him. All eyes fell on Nathan. He said nothing for a moment, then proceeded to assign each team member their pre-arranged role. These duties had been ironed out in the action plan long before this decapitation operation, and now he was simply restating them. It's worth noting that, although Shikaku Nara, the venerable patriarch of the Nara clan, famed for his strategic genius, had helped devise the plan, he was not in command. That responsibility belonged to the young Minato Namikaze. Clearly, third Hokage, Hiruzen Sarutobi, was preparing Minato to succeed him. Hiruzen must have known that, once the Fourth Shinobi World War ended, he would likely step down, so he began grooming his replacement ahead of time. Fortunately, no one objected. Minato's calm confidence and formidable skill won instant respect, and the shinobi were eager to support one another under his leadership. Unseen by Nathan, several politically astute families within Konoha had already staked their loyalties behind this mission. It was their behind-the-scenes backing, these families' precise timing and resourcefulness, that made it possible to assemble this strike force in the first place. Chapter 504. Each shows his power. Once the plan is set, Konoha's shinobi split into 3 strike teams to assault Kirigakure's base camp at Atsuzu Port from the left flank, the center, and the right flank. In the center, the Inari, Deer, and Butterfly clans hold the front lines, bolstered by the Inuzuka and Moonlight clans. On the left, the Hyuga clan leads the charge, with support from the Aburame, Yuhi, and several smaller houses. On the right, the Uchiha clan goes it alone. This isn't a deliberate slight by 4th Hokage Minato Namikaze. Before the operation, he personally asked Uchiha Fugaku whether he wanted backup. Fugaku declined. The rest of the Uchiha stand ready, neither resentful nor intimidated. As Konoha's largest and most self-reliant clan, they see no need for assistance. Nathan watches this deployment and quietly shakes his head. There's nothing more he can do. Even Fugaku Uchiha, despite his position as clan leader, could not override the unanimous decision of his kin. After all, what orders could one man, no matter how distinguished, issue to shinobi whose Sharingan each bore 3 tomei, the unmistakable mark of Jonin-level mastery? With such power at their backs, they were more than qualified to undertake this mission on their own. When Fugaku shook his head in refusal, Minato Namikaze offered no argument. He cast one last, assessing glance at Nathan and simply said, "All right, let's go." In an instant, the assembled force divided into 3 squads. Thanks to Minato's Flying Thunder God technique, they bypassed every barricade en route and arrived before Yujin Port's outer defenses in the blink of an eye. Only a final line of fortifications remained between them and the port's heart, and it was barely more than a formality. At the center of that barrier stood Akimichi Danzo, head of the Akimichi clan. Without hesitation, he expanded his flesh to colossal proportions and unleashed his clan's signature, multi-size technique. The very ground trembled as his gargantuan form tore through the enemy defenses, and the battle for Yujin Port began in earnest. Nathan's body swelled in an instant, growing into a towering figure over 10 meters tall. He swung his iron rod in a single, sweeping arc, an unstoppable blow that shattered the fog ninja formation like glass splintering under a hammer. "Watch out! Get clear! Fight back!" Panic rippled through the crowd as every eye fixed on the colossal Akimichi warrior. Seizing the opening, Shikaku Nara, leader of the Nara clan, brought his palms together and channeled chakra into his secret shadow technique. His shadow stretched across the ground, splitting into dozens of writhing tendrils that slipped around the flanks of the fog ninjas. In the next heartbeat, a dozen of them crumpled under his will, their minds bound by the Nara leader's control. No sooner had Shikaku secured his captives than Yamanaka Kaiichi, head of the Yamanaka clan, stepped forward. With a graceful gesture, he unleashed the Ninpo, Shinran Enbu no Jutsu. A surge of psychic energy swept over those same fog ninjas, shattering their wills. Freed from Shikaku's puppetry, they fell under Kaiichi's own mind control, instantly turning their weapons on their former allies. In the chaos of colliding loyalties and shattered defenses, the battle for Kiri had only just begun. Akimichi Choza pressed the attack, drawing the mist ninjas' focus and creating openings for Nathan and their ally. He even acted as a human shield when necessary. The three fighters moved with such seamless coordination that the Mist Clan's defense at Aburatsu port collapsed in a single breath. Seizing the moment, reinforcements from the Inuzuka and Moonlight clans flooded into the port, charging headlong into the fray. On the left flank, Hyuga Hizashi, flanked by his younger brother and several branch clan warriors, unleashed Gentle Fist at full strength, driving the enemy back in a relentless advance. Aburame Shinobi swarmed the battlefield, sending out clouds of parasitic insects that the Mist Ninja simply couldn't counter. Meanwhile, on the right, the Uchiha clan held its ground. Though their engagement was less chaotic than the others, the Uchiha's precision and killing efficiency were every bit as devastating. Nathan activated his Sharingan, and the world around him slowed to a crawl. Every feint, every strike of the Mist Shinobi before him hung in the air like a spider's web. Deprived of their usual speed and precision, and ensnared by genjutsu, the enemy couldn't land a single decisive blow. Within minutes, Nathan and his squad had torn through the last defensive line at Yujin Port. Wasting no time, they surged past the fallen ninja and into the heart of the facility. Even as the alarm bells began to toll, Nathan pressed on, guiding his teammates down winding corridors until the looming gates of Kirigakure's headquarters came into view. The thick fog that clung to the outside world could not dampen their momentum. With one final coordinated burst, they breached the main entrance and swept into the compound's central courtyard. Inside the command chamber, department chiefs from every division had hastily assembled, panic etched on their faces. News of Konoha's unexpected offensive had arrived only moments before, leaving them scrambling for a response. Now, reports confirmed that a full squad of Konoha's Jonin was already inside the perimeter. They all understood what this meant. Konoha intended to strike at the very heart of their village. The question left hanging in the tense torchlit room was clear. Once the invasion force was here, how would they stop it? Aburatsu Port served as Kirigakure's forward base on this battlefield, but, like Konoha's own encampment, it was lightly held. Most of the shinobi stationed there were either wounded or assigned to support duties, hardly enough to form a true fighting force. When the final defensive line finally collapsed, Aburatsu Port lost its last real bulwark of protection. It was clear they needed a plan, and fast. Within moments, 2 orders crackled in from Kirigakure headquarters. First, all available forces were to fall back and consolidate around the command post, shrinking their perimeter to concentrate their defenses. Second, any shinobi on detached duty beyond the camp were to return immediately as reinforcements. The first directive was straightforward. Thanks to their intimate knowledge of the terrain, the surviving Mist Ninja slipped back into Aburatsu Port's center and dug in. Soon, they were trading blows in a brutal firefight with Nathan and his team as they pressed the assault. The second order, however, proved far more complicated. It wasn't that the Mist Shinobi in the field were unwilling to answer the call for aid, far from it, but by the time the recall went out, Konoha had already sent its elite command detachment from the Yamanaka and Nara clans. Once those reinforcements arrived, the tide of battle shifted back in Konoha's favor, and the stranded Mist Ninja found themselves caught between the enemy's renewed advance and their own stalled relief effort. Now, with the window for reinforcement closing fast, Kirigakure's commanders had to decide whether to hold their ground or risk everything on one final, desperate counterstrike. They struck first by pinning down the mist shinobi on the battlefield, cutting off any chance for reinforcements to return to the village. Those few mist ninja who did manage to slip away found themselves too far from Yujin Port to change the outcome. In truth, the battle was lost for Kirigakure the moment Nathan and his team sprang their trap. No help from the hidden village could have reached them in time. Until now, Nathan had worried that Uchiha Madara might betray their operation by tipping off the mist leadership. Madara's intimate grasp of the decapitation plan meant he could easily have warned Kirigakure and watched their scheme collapse. If that had happened, if the enemy had been prepared and set a counter-ambush, they would have faced disaster. Yet Madara said nothing. Nathan estimated 2 reasons for this. First, Nara Chiguang's Confidentia measures worked exactly as intended. Even Nathan himself had only learned the precise hour of the attack via a sealed letter delivered just hours before the operation began. As for the second reason, Nathan could only speculate, but whatever it was, it had kept their plans safely under wraps. Nathan frowned as he pieced it all together. Minato Namikaze's plan to regroup their forces with his Flying Thunder God technique had only come to light an hour ago, hardly enough time for Madara Uchiha to learn of it, let alone pass the word on to Kirigakure. More to the point, Madara simply didn't care. It wasn't a matter of inability or reluctance, but pure indifference. Every move he'd made so far had been designed only to manipulate Minato. Now that Minato was gone, Madara's ultimate strategy could roll out unhindered. So why should he bother with the lives of Kirigakure's shinobi? To Madara, disposing of a tool that had outlived its usefulness was as natural as breathing. Whatever his true motives, the planned decapitation strike should have succeeded. With that troubling thought in the back of his mind, Nathan turned his gaze to the line of mist ninjas before him. Chapter 505, Fighting. The battlefield was utter chaos. Dust swirled around broken shields and shattered weapons, and the distant clamor of war drums echoed through the air. Nathan had just dispatched 1 mist ninja, and before he could catch his breath, several more surged toward him. Their tattered uniforms and bloodied bindings told him everything he needed to know. These foes were badly wounded, 2 of them still swathed in bandages. Nathan hesitated. He disliked attacking the injured. Mercy, after all, was a virtue, until survival was at stake. In a war where the only rule was kill or be killed, compassion was a liability. With that grim realization, he resolved to act without delay. Summoning every ounce of his skill, Nathan unleashed his instant sword technique. In a heartbeat, he closed the distance to the nearest wounded ninja, barely a chunin, so fast it seemed he'd vanished and reappeared at his side. The mist shinobi's eyes widened in shock, but before he could raise his blade, Nathan's sword slashed in a clean arc across his throat. Blood spurted in a crimson fountain, and Nathan slid back, narrowly evading the spray. The ninja crumpled, life ebbing away within seconds. There was no time to dwell on it. Nathan steadied his blade, his breath slowed to a calm rhythm, and he kept his senses trained on the remaining attackers. Mercy might have lived in his heart, but on this battlefield, only victory mattered. Nathan barely registered the movement before a trio of mist ninjas hurled their kunai at him. With a single, steely glance, he locked onto each weapon's trajectory. A green aura flickered around him as he activated his instant sword technique, weaving through the airborne blades in the blink of an eye. He reappeared behind one of the injured ninja. That man, having witnessed his companion's fate, managed to lift his wakizashi and block Nathan's blow, only to have Nathan feint at the rib and, in the next instant, sever his head with a single, clean stroke. The remaining mist ninjas paled at the sight. Nathan paid them no heed. He vanished in another flash, materializing before the third opponent. His sword gleamed in the moonlight as he swung in a powerful downward arc. Ding! The ring of steel on steel echoed sharply. This time, the Kirigakure Chunin raised his kunai just in time to deflect the blow. Nathan began to withdraw his blade, preparing to strike again, when a second Chunin lunged at him from the side, thrusting his kunai straight toward Nathan's throat. Time seemed to slow as Nathan's eyes narrowed, and then, with a swift sidestep, he was already moving on to his next counterattack. Sensing imminent danger, Nathan whipped his head around, and locked eyes with a Kirigakure Chunin. In that instant, he activated his Sharingan Genjutsu. The Chunin froze, his entire being pulled into Nathan's illusion. Yet even trapped, the shinobi's veteran instincts cried out. With a powerful shove, he redirected Nathan's long sword aside, then brought his kunai up in a slashing arc aimed at Nathan's throat. The blade's sharp edge sliced through the air. Nathan didn't hesitate. He tapped the ground with his toes, launching himself backward at lightning speed. The kunai cut nothing but empty space. Rather than give chase, the mist ninja steadied himself to dispel the illusion binding his companion. At that precise moment, two shurikens whistled through the clearing toward him. Instinctively, he brought up his kunai in quick succession, clang clang, and met both blades head-on, deflecting them harmlessly aside. Yoshino Tsukasa's eyes went wide at the sight of the tumbling shurikens. A soft gasp escaped his lips. Just as Tsukasa let his guard slip, a sickening thud echoed from behind him, the sound of steel tearing into flesh. He whipped around to see his Mist Village comrade, still under Nathan's Sharingan illusion, gasping, a shuriken buried deep in his throat. The pain shattered the genjutsu at once. The ninja clutched at his neck, eyes wide with panic, before crumpling to the ground in a dying heap. Tsukasa's heart pounded. He realized the blow to his friend had been a feint all along. In the very moment he'd focused on protecting his own neck, Nathan had hurled 3 shurikens, 2 obvious blades glinting in the moonlight, and one hidden in their shared shadow. Tsukasa's reflexes had deflected the 2 bright projectiles, but the concealed shuriken struck its mark. He whirled to face Nathan, who stood perfectly still, his expression unreadable. The truth was brutal and clear. Nathan had never spared an opening. He'd simply exploited every one. Despite his efforts, the Mist Shinobi collapsed in an instant, his life extinguished before anyone could react. Seizing the moment, another ninja from the village hidden in the mist, positioned a short distance away, completed his hand seals and unleashed the long-prepared ninjutsu aimed at Nathan. Crack! A blinding flash of lightning erupted from his palms, coalescing into 2 crackling whips of pure electricity that hurtled straight toward Nathan. Recognition flickered in Nathan's eyes. If only he'd mastered lightning chakra, he could have copied this very technique. Its blend of speed and control would fill the gaps in his arsenal perfectly. He shook his head with regret. Not yet, he thought. What a shame. With a soft sigh, Nathan sprang backward, evading the thunderous lashes through a series of swift, precise bounds. To an ordinary shinobi, those electric whips would have been impossible to dodge. But through the lens of his Sharingan, their speed was merely sufficient, not overwhelming. In no time at all, he slipped clear of their deadly arc. Nathan hesitated only for an instant. He knew better than to close in, as long as Shinrai still wielded that crackling thunder whip. With lightning-quick precision, he sheathed his sword and formed a hand seal. A fierce chant escaped his lips, fire style, great dragon fire formation. In a single exhalation, 3 immense serpents of flame roared into existence. 2 of the fire dragons tore off toward Shinrai's crackling whips. The third lunged directly at the mist-hidden ninja himself. Startled, Shinrai stumbled back, his own whip snapping forward in a desperate counterstrike. Though there's no inherent elemental advantage between lightning and fire, Nathan's mastery of the great dragon fire formation and his deep reserve of chakra tipped the scales decisively in his favor. In the flash of that first clash, both of Shinrai's thunder whips were shredded to splinters. The 2 fire dragons themselves took some damage in the exchange, but they remained whole, roaring defiantly as they regrouped. With a silent nod from Nathan, all 3 dragons surged forward once more, bearing down on the fallen ninja in a blazing wave of destruction. Nathan's 3 fire dragons swooped in, but Kojima Shinrai was ready. He countered with his thunder whip, deflecting their flames and slipping out of range. Frustrated, the dragons vanished, their attack fizzling into nothing. Nathan raised his hand, preparing to unleash Wind-style, Windblade. But before he could, Yoshino Tsukasa charged in. Tsukasa's eyes burned with grief over his fallen comrades, but despair had given way to fierce determination. In his hand gleamed a razor-sharp kunai as he hurtled toward Nathan, vowing vengeance. Nathan didn't pause. With a clang, he drew his longsword and surged forward to meet him. The 2 weapons collided in a burst of sparks and ringing steel. Chapter 5 or 6, just for fun. Steel rasped against steel as Nathan's long blade clashed with the mist shinobi's kunai. Locked in a deadly stalemate, Nathan summoned the power of his Sharingan, preparing to entrap his opponent in a genjutsu. But Yoshinoji, having seen firsthand what the Sharingan could do, refused to be fooled again. In an instant, he broke contact, shut his eyes, and fell back. By abandoning the fight, he evaded Nathan's illusion, but he also handed over the initiative. Without hesitation, Nathan surged forward. Clang, clang, clang. The night air rang with the sound of metal meeting metal as Nathan's Sharingan-guided strikes probed every opening in Yoshinoji's defense. Anticipating each feint and parry, he wove a blistering series of attacks, each one more precise than the last. In mere moments, the shinobi's guard was in tatters. With ruthless efficiency, Nathan thrust his blade into Yoshinoji's chest. The sickening crack of steel slicing flesh echoed through the clearing. Yoshinoji reeled backward, crimson spreading across his tunic. He tried to pull away, but the wound left him too weak to fight on. Staggering, he crumpled to his knees as Nathan stood over him, victory sealed. Nathan's wind-infused chakra still tore into Kojima's chest, shredding his uniform and leaving a dark stain of blood as it gushed out and soaked his clothes. Despite the grievous wound, Nathan refused to back down. Gritting his teeth, he prepared to deliver one last decisive strike. But Kojima was already moving. Summoning his Thunder Escape technique once more, he eschewed his usual crackling whip and instead launched a volley of compressed violet lightning spheres. Nathan caught the flash of their charged energy in his peripheral vision and felt a cold thrill of alarm. So much power, such deadly potential. Tsk, tsk, Nathan muttered, tensing his muscles and rolling aside at the last instant. Each thunderball slammed into the ground with a thunderous roar, detonating into a sizzling pool of electricity that blackened the earth. Bolts of raw lightning danced in the crater, writhing like furious serpents. Had even one struck him, the searing heat alone would have burned through his defenses, and the lingering paralysis would have robbed him of every ounce of speed and strength. Breathing hard, Nathan forced himself to stand. The battlefield lay scorched and smoking around him, but he refused to yield. Drawing on every last reserve of chakra, he steadied his trembling hand on the hilt of his blade, ready for whatever came next. Nathan clenched his teeth, realizing he couldn't withstand the thunder spheres by relying on his earth escape and hardening technique alone. Even at mastery level 6, thunder escape simply wasn't built to absorb an explosion of that magnitude. Fortunately, his opponent's thunder release ninjutsu, while powerful, was painfully slow. With a sudden sidestep, Nathan evaded the crackling orbs and in the same motion wove a swift wind seal. A transparent blade of compressed air nearly a meter long sliced through the air and drove itself into Yoshinoji's chest, following the line of his earlier injury. The shock froze Yoshinoji mid-dodge. Before he could recover, the blade burst from his back in a spray of scarlet, gouging a deep crater in the wall behind him. Yoshinoji's eyes went wide with disbelief as he stared at Nathan, rage and humiliation warring in his gaze. He, too, had vowed to kill Nathan, to avenge his fallen comrades. Nathan watched impassively as blood exploded from the enemy's mouth. In an instant, the man's body split cleanly at the waist, collapsing to the ground in two motionless halves. Kojima Shinlei stared, eyes wide with terror. He spun on his heel and bolted, only to be overtaken in a heartbeat. A vivid green aura flared around Nathan as he unleashed the snap sword technique at full power, his speed surging to unnatural heights. In the blink of an eye, he appeared directly behind Shinlei. A green-tinged blade of light flashed. With a sharp shing, Nathan slashed across Shinlei's back, ripping a deep gouge down to bone. Shinlei staggered forward, too stunned to turn and face him. Desperate, he tried to flee, but Nathan was relentless. He didn't hesitate. With his left hand, he molded a crackling blue sphere of chakra, the Rasengan, and hurled it at Shinlei's chest. The impact sent the ninja hurtling through the air. Bang! Shinlei's body slammed against the far wall, the sound of the collision echoing like a gunshot. He slid down in a crumpled heap, utterly defeated, no second chance granted. Nathan regarded the wounded enemy with cold detachment, stepping forward to deliver the final blow. At that moment, though, several more mist ninja appeared on the periphery. He paused and frowned. There was no need to finish him off. The man's injuries were already mortal. He wouldn't last much longer. With a quiet resolve, Nathan sprang upward and in 3 swift bounds landed on the roof of a nearby building. From this vantage point, he surveyed the battlefield. Around the Kirigakure headquarters, the fighting was fierce and unrelenting. Mist Ninja outnumbered their opponents at every turn. Even though only 50 shinobi had been posted here as the rear guard, that paled in comparison to the endless waves of mist warriors attacking from every direction outside Yujin Port. A single glance confirmed the dire situation. Each Konoha ninja was contending with 5 or 6 adversaries at once, and still more enemies were pouring in, drawn by the chaos of battle. Nathan's jaw tightened. The struggle for Kirigakure had only just begun. Nathan's squad held the advantage from the start. Though none were legendary warriors, they'd already cut down countless Kirigakure shinobi on the march. Otherwise, the enemy's losses would have been even higher. Their strength lay in pure, unrelenting force. Kirigakure could send wave after wave of soldiers, but most were mid to low-level ninja, recovering wounded, auxiliary operatives, and other support troops with limited combat effectiveness. In contrast, Nathan's side consisted solely of Konoha's clan elites. Even when a handful of Kirigakure's upper-ranked shinobi tried to intervene, they were quickly surrounded and cut down by the patriarchs of the major families. Now, with the outer defenses cleared, Nathan and his comrades pressed forward toward the enemy headquarters. From his vantage point on the battlefield's fringes, he allowed himself a grim satisfaction. So far, there had been no real danger. Yet as they advanced deeper into hostile territory, Nathan knew better than to underestimate what might lie ahead. On the battlefield outside Yujin Port, Konoha's shinobi fought desperately to prevent the Kirigakure forces from slipping back through their lines, but the port's layered defenses stood firm. From the outer perimeter to the innermost barrier, the Mist Ninjas maintained solid control. Even when they had to detach a few squads to slow down the leaf reinforcements, they still had more than enough troops guarding the heart of the defense. Nathan watched the skirmishes unfold, understanding exactly why he'd been posted here. If the clan patriarchs, along with Minato Namikaze and their strike team, couldn't breach the concealed mist headquarters and neutralize the enemy quickly, every shinobi on the outer field would be left dangerously exposed. Minato had counted on him to hold the line as long as necessary, buying their side the precious minutes they needed. Nathan had no quarrel with the plan. Whether you were leading the charge or holding the wall, you accepted the risk. That was the nature of battle, and it was only fair. Chapter 507, Goal Achieved. Nathan surveyed the battlefield, weighing every angle of attack, yet before he could act, the mist ninjas around him sprang into motion. Whoosh! 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 A hail of kunai streaked toward him, each blade aimed at his vital points and arranged to hem him in. Poisoned darts and kunai rigged with detonation tags clattered among the others, proof that his opponents were bent on nothing less than his death. Most jonin would have found themselves in a tight spot. Not Nathan. With calm precision, he raised a hand and formed a single-hand seal. He channeled his chakra, then unleashed a powerful gust of air. Wind release, great breakthrough. In an instant, the very wind itself surged into a roaring gale, the sky seeming to flicker and warp under its force. The incoming kunai didn't stand a chance. Each one was blasted aside, scattered harmlessly across the clearing by Nathan's tempest. Alarmed by the sudden updraft, one of the mist ninjas shouted, "Watch yourselves! He's using wind release!" Before they could regroup, the first explosion rocked the battlefield. Boom! That was followed almost at once by a second, and then a third, each one triggered by the hidden detonation tags they'd lobbed at Nathan. Flashes of light and scorching blasts erupted around him, but already the air wind sliced clear. Dust and debris spun wildly through the air, the echoes of the detonations rolling off the surrounding hills like thunder. Against all odds, Nathan stood steady at the storm's heart. His cloak snapped in the gale as he prepared for the next wave, knowing full well that surviving this onslaught was only the beginning of achieving his true objective. The explosion's shockwaves radiated outward like ripples on a pond. Combined with the gale-force wind Nathan expelled in a single breath, every enemy in his path was knocked off their feet, staggering backward in disarray. For a moment, the battlefield fell eerily silent, but before anyone could draw a steady breath, Nathan leapt from the rooftop, drawing his blade mid-air and unleashing his instant sword technique. In an instant, he was among them, steel flashing, one life-ending strike after another. 15 minutes passed in a blur of clashing steel and desperate shouts. Wave after wave of Kirigakure's soldiers had come at him, only to be cut down by his unerring skill and unbreakable resolve. Now, as he squared his shoulders for the sixth assault, a courier arrived with news that lit hope across the field. Minato Namikaze and his squad had finally shattered Kirigakure's last line of defense and stormed into the enemy headquarters at the heart of their territory. The mission he'd risked everything for was on the brink of success. Even if Minato's team hadn't breached the command center directly, the enemy's leadership was already scattered. Kirigakure's generals could no longer marshal their forces effectively. Nathan allowed himself a brief nod of satisfaction. The final obstacle was crumbling. Victory was within reach. They joined the fray the moment Minato Namikaze and his team launched their assault. Now, as Minato's men prepared to storm the enemy headquarters, it was obvious the opposition was all but defeated. Nathan figured that even if they stopped now, they could call it a win. But Minato's unwavering resolve to press on hinted at deeper motives. Perhaps key Kirigakure officers still survived inside, or perhaps Minato planned to wipe out every last foe and shatter the village's command structure once and for all. Intelligence gathering was another possibility. Nathan knew how furious Nara Chiguang and the other elders were about the recent leaks. If there was the slightest clue to recover, they would seize it. Unfortunately, Nathan suspected their efforts were already too late. After tonight, any white Zetsu imposters posing as enemy shinobi would disappear for good. No matter how flawless their mimicry, it only takes one fatal casualty to expose the ruse, and once that happened, the true identities of every replacement would be laid bare. Neither Madara nor Zetsu wants White Zetsu's existence exposed right now. This battle provides the perfect cover. Once the shinobi here vanish, the village will start asking how sensitive information leaked in the first place, but by then it'll be too late. They'll remain completely in the dark. Nathan shook his head, drove that worry away, and refocused on the encircling mist ninja. His recent displays of power had drawn an ever-growing swarm of foes, none individually dangerous, but collectively a relentless nuisance. He scanned for an opening. If he risked unleashing his Mangekyo Sharingan, he could manifest a first-stage Susanoo and cut them down in an instant. Yet such recklessness now could jeopardize everything. Boom! A tag detonated nearby. Nathan slipped out of the way of a desperate counterstrike from one of the mist shinobi just before the blast struck. As the smoke cleared, he swept his gaze across the battlefield, and a spark of anticipation flashed in his eyes. Moments ago, the mist ninjas had pulled back to avoid the fallout from their comrades' self-detonation, leaving a wide-open space around Nathan. Seizing the chance, he sidestepped the nearest shuriken, sprang forward, and vaulted onto the roof of a neighboring building. If he could climb higher, he might slip through their encirclement altogether. But the enemy wasn't about to let him go so easily. "Cut him off! Don't let him escape!" someone snarled. In an instant, a cloud of kunai whistled toward him. Nathan caught sight of each deadly projectile tumbling through the air. He noted there were no explosive tags attached. This was a straightforward attack. Tucking his sword back into its scabbard, he dropped into a low stance and formed a hand seal. The air around him hummed with chakra as he invoked his ninjutsu. Earth release. Hardening technique. His skin rippled, darkening and corrugating until it resembled living rock. The first kunai struck his shoulder with a metallic clang, sparks scattering into the night. They ricocheted off harmlessly, pinging against his armored flesh. With every subsequent missile, the same dull ding echoed, proof that Nathan's defenses held fast. Not a single blade broke through. He crouched under the hail of steel, unscathed and ready for his next move. One of the mist ninjas swore under his breath. "Lightning release! Now!" he barked. Instantly, two of his comrades dropped into hand seals, electricity crackling at their fingertips as they prepared to strike. Nathan, however, wasn't about to stand there and take it. As the first kunai hurled toward him, he dropped into his own seals and roared, "Fire release!" Great fireball jutsu. 500 chakra surged through him. A towering sphere of flame erupted from his palms and hurtled down upon the mist squad. A handful of them scrambled to form a water release barrier, but when they saw the sheer size of that blazing orb, their courage melted away. They scattered like leaves in a storm. Boom! The inferno slammed into the ground with staggering force. Both sidewalls crumbled instantly, sending stone and dust flying in every direction. The blast alone rivaled a full ninja weapon assault. If that had been the end of it, Nathan might have breathed easier. But he wasn't finished yet. After the fireball detonated, the unleashed flames careened wildly outward, instantly shrinking the Mist Ninja Squad's maneuvering space. Fortunately, the blast had expended most of its energy on impact. A handful of Mist Ninjas lunged together, forming a tight barrier to stem the fiery tide, buying just enough time for Nathan to strike. Spotting a lone ninja on the edge of the formation, Nathan's fingers flashed through the intricate seals of his next technique. With a single focused thought, he intoned, "Fire style, Sushoku Jutsu." A screech tore through the ranks as everyone turned to see their comrade engulfed in roaring flames, writhing on the scorched ground. "What's happening?" one shouted. "It's the Ghost Blade. Nathan's attacked him." Before they could pull their fallen teammate to Fetty, or even mount a counterattack, Nathan was already moving on to his third assault. He inhaled deeply, then roared, "Fire style, Phoenix Fire Technique." From his mouth exploded a relentless hail of fireballs, dozens, perhaps hundreds, each orb streaking forward like a leaden bullet from a high-caliber gun. The stadium of flame swept across the battlefield, crashing into the Mist Ninjas below and turning the ground into a blistering inferno. Dazed and overpowered, they had no choice but to absorb the onslaught, inching backward under Nathan's merciless barrage. "Be careful! Take cover! Argh!" The Mist Ninjas scattered in panic as Nathan pressed his attack. Seizing the moment, he launched several kunai rigged with detonating tags. Thanks to his Sharingan's predictive power, he placed them with unerring precision among the enemy ranks. Boom, boom, boom. 3 deafening explosions rippled through the fog. Fiery shockwaves converged on the Mist Ninjas, sending them sprawling. 3 shinobi collapsed, grievously wounded. The rest were battered and bleeding. None could withstand Nathan's onslaught. With a single, ringing clang, he drew his long sword. A green chakra aura flared along the blade, and in an instant Nathan vanished from sight. 2 minutes later, the battlefield fell silent, littered only with smoldering craters where the Mist Ninja had stood. Chapter 508. Nathan stood alone on the battered street, blade in hand, surrounded by the lifeless bodies of Mist Ninjas. He had just held off the 6th wave of attackers. A quiet breath escaped him as he sheathed his long knife, gathering his thoughts. With a powerful leap, he vaulted onto the next rooftop, then another, until he reached the highest vantage point. From here, he looked down on the chaos below. Konoha shinobi clashed with remnants of the fog, but Nathan paid them little mind. His eyes were fixed on the distant command center, its windows and cracks flickering with bursts of flame, crackling lightning, rushing water, and other elemental jutsu. The fog ninjas holed up there were clearly making their final stand. Nathan felt the familiar thrill of opening his Byakugan to get a clearer view, but he hesitated. Several Hyuga clan members were nearby. Activating his Dujutsu could draw unwanted attention. He forced himself to stand still. The mist forces were dwindling, their strength all but spent. There was no need to risk exposing his abilities. Whatever happened next, the fog's resistance would soon shatter, and Nathan would be ready. Nathan's gaze flicked to the horizon just as a thought crossed his mind, and froze. A squad of Mist Ninja, their cloaks whipping behind them, was charging toward their position. He tightened his grip on his kunai, eyes narrowing. If these had been the ordinary local garrison, he wouldn't have batted an eye. But they weren't from the Kirigakure base at Yujin Port. These reinforcements had come from beyond the port's outer defenses. "Nara Keiko must have failed to hold the inner line," he murmured. He'd warned his superiors that because Konoha's forces hadn't pushed into this region yet, the Fog Village unit stationed near Atsu Port would be free to regroup, and that their counterattack couldn't be postponed indefinitely. Now his fears had been confirmed. The Mist Ninja were on the move, racing back to bolster their comrades. Nathan braced himself. The real battle was about to begin. Nathan surveyed the battlefield, tense and alert. Their adversary currently only fielded a single squad, yet that meant nothing. This was just the opening move. Reinforcements would pour in soon enough, and if they didn't withdraw immediately, they'd be cut off and overwhelmed. There was no time to lose. He shook his head at the suggestion of using Namikaze Minato's Flying Thunder God technique to escape. It simply wasn't feasible. Minato had already spent more than 3/4 of his chakra just to teleport here once. After the recent clash, there'd be almost nothing left. Even if a few of their own had fallen in the skirmish, slightly reducing the number who needed evacuating, it still demanded more tenacity than Minato could muster. Nathan reminded himself that from the very start, their extraction plan hadn't hinged on Minato's teleportation. If they let themselves get surrounded now, Kirigakure's numerical superiority would swallow them alive, no matter how skilled they were. Determined to avert disaster, Nathan raised his hand and wove a swift hand seal. He activated the heart-opening technique, forging a mental link to Namikaze Minato. Within moments, his comrade's calm, confident voice echoed in Nathan's mind. "Nathan, what's your status?" Nathan steeled himself. "We need immediate extraction. Hostile reinforcements are inbound, and we can't afford to hold this position." "Understood," Minato replied without hesitation. "I'll open a gateway. Be ready to move." Nathan clenched his jaw. "Thanks, Minato. We'll be on our way." As Minato prepared the teleportation jutsu, Nathan cast one last glance over his team, determined faces, side by side with him, and prepared to lead them through the portal to safety. There would be time to fight another day. For now, survival depended on speed and flawless coordination, and Nathan would see them all home. "Nathan?" Minato Namikaze's voice echoed in Nathan's mind. "It's me." Nathan answered and wasted no words, immediately relaying everything he'd seen. After a brief pause, Minato asked, "If you struck with all your strength, how long could you hold him off?" He deliberately stressed the phrase, "all your strength," testing whether Nathan was still holding back. Nathan met the question with an unreadable expression. It didn't surprise him that Minato had sensed his restraint. After all, the fourth Hokage ranked among the sharpest minds in the shinobi world. They'd crossed paths many times. If Minato failed to notice Nathan's hidden power, something would be seriously off. Nathan's enormous chakra signature alone made concealing his true potential all but impossible. Yet even with the Mangekyo Sharingan active, he sensed Minato hadn't fully grasped just how much strength he wielded. Only that a portion remained in reserve. It was completely unexpected when Nathan activated the legendary Mangekyo Sharingan. To anyone unfamiliar with its power, there'd be no visible change, even up close. 1,000 considerations raced through his mind, but he forced himself to stay calm. After a heartbeat's hesitation, he spoke into his communicator. 10 minutes. He chose a cautious estimate. Besides the Mist Ninja currently blocking their reinforcements at the front, more reinforcements were surely on the way. They needed time. At the other end of the line, Namikaze Minato exhaled in relief. "We won't need that long. 5 minutes, tops, and we'll be done. Then we fall back on Plan 3. "Understood." Nathan cut the transmission. There was a sharp crack as he twisted his neck, vertebrae clicking into place. He lifted his head and surveyed the gathering ranks of Mist Ninja at Yujin Harbor, their weapons glinting in the fading light. A cold smile curved his lips. In a voice only he could hear, he declared, "Now, the real battle begins." For Nathan, this was just the opening act. The true fight, the one that would test every ounce of his power and resolve, had officially begun. Nathan had already weathered 6 waves of Mist Shinobi, and although their numbers were daunting, they'd all been Chunin or Jinin. Facing mid to low-rank opponents hardly counted as a real fight. It was more like a warm-up. Any chakra he expended was swiftly restored by his chakra absorption technique, leaving him virtually unscathed. How could such skirmishes be called true battles? This next group, however, felt different. As the squad drew near, Nathan immediately sensed that their leader was a genuine Jonin. 2 other shinobi flanked him, their auras slightly weaker, likely Tokubetsu Jonin, specialists in unique skills. Their combined strength demanded Nathan's full attention. He lifted a hand and wove a hand seal. Wind style, wind wings. With a soft rush of air, A pair of pale blue chakra wings unfurled from his back. Beating powerfully under his command, the wings lifted him into the sky. Hovering above the battlefield, Nathan flew straight toward the incoming mist team, ready at last for a true confrontation. Nathan knew he couldn't afford to wait around. He had to strike first. He surged forward, pushing his speed to the absolute limit, and in the blink of an eye, found himself floating high above the squad of mist ninja. Flying ninjutsu? Uchiha Nathan? The mist team leader, Yoshida Hiro, peered upward, frowning. He barked in order, but his men's projectiles fell short, unable to reach Nathan's swift form. Yet letting the Uchiha hover overhead unchallenged felt equally intolerable. Yoshida shook off the doubt. He wasn't here to spar with Nathan. He had a rescue mission to complete. With a sharp hand signal, he rallied his closest warriors and molded chakra for a signature jutsu. Water style, hidden mist technique. A thick veil of milky mist billowed out, enveloping the entire squad in seconds and concealing their every move. Under cover of the swirling fog, the mist ninja charged forward, ready to ambush their unseen target. They intended to use the dense fog as cover for a swift advance to the battlefield. In theory, it was a brilliant plan, but in practice, its execution quickly unraveled. Chapter 509. Forced Ha. High above Yujin Port, Nathan looked down at the thick wall of white mist cloaking the mist ninja below and let out a mocking laugh. With a swift set of hand seals, he unleashed his wind-style great breakthrough. A violent gale ripped through the fog. On the ground, Commander Yoshida Yingxiong and his squad struggled desperately to hold the mist barrier in place. But Nathan's wind jutsu was simply too powerful. In mere moments, the veil shattered, scattering like broken clouds. The mist ninja had only managed to advance a few dozen meters into the port, still far from their command center. That gap, Nathan knew, they would never be able to close. Floating effortlessly above the exposed enemy, Nathan scanned the regrouping mist ninja. Without a word, he began another series of seals, pouring chakra into a second technique. Fire style, great fireball technique. From his aerial perch, he channeled an immense sphere of crimson flame and hurled it down at his foes below. The darkness suddenly receded, and for miles around the night sky blazed with an unearthly light. A single, massive fireball hurtled downward like a second sun, its oppressive heat radiating even at a distance. Those forced to look upon it, an assembly of mist ninjas stationed below, stood stunned, their eyes locked on the fiery orb, jaws slack with shock. A thunderous voice cut through the silence. Scatter! Shaken from their stupor, the ninjas bolted in every direction like startled birds, desperate to escape. Boom! The fireball struck the ground with deafening force, erupting into a towering wall of flame that surged outward. Trees, flowers, even the smallest creatures, snakes, insects, rats, were instantly swallowed by the blaze. Nearby buildings ignited in an instant, and the world around them was transformed into a furious sea of fire under the now orange-tinged sky. Nathan panted heavily, the effort of molding and controlling that massive fireball nearly overwhelming him. But it had worked. Thick plumes of ash and heat drove the mist ninjas into full retreat. Nathan inhaled deeply, flexed the wings that sprouted from his back, and locked his gaze on the most dangerous fleeing shinobi, the mist's elite, Yoshida Hiro. The other enemy operatives would be intercepted by Konoha's perimeter forces. Lower-rank mist ninjas posed no real threat to the center of the fight. All Nathan had to do was keep Hiro and two other high-grade opponents in his sights. With a sudden burst of speed, Nathan launched himself into the air, swooping to hover just above Yoshida Hiro's head. Hiro pumped his legs, sprinting across scorched earth, then spun on his heel and hurled a gleaming kunai straight upward. He hoped the surprise attack would catch Nathan off guard, but Nathan merely let his Sharingan flare to life. In an instant, he traced the knife's flight path and calculated its next arc. He tilted his torso, slipping effortlessly out of the kunai's trajectory, and prepared to strike back. Swift as lightning, Nathan lunged forward and caught the kunai by its ring the moment it whizzed past him. With a deft flick of his wrist, he spun the blade once at his fingertips, then hurled it back toward Yoshida Hiro. Caught off guard, Yoshida Hiro stumbled sideways, narrowly evading the returning kunai, just the opening Nathan needed. Hands dancing like butterflies among blossoms, Nathan wove a rapid series of hand seals, each one precise and fluid. He then exhaled 3 roaring dragons of fire, shaped in the form of the character Pin. This was no ordinary fire-style jutsu, but the upgraded fire-style, Great Dragon Fire technique. Boom, boom. The 3 fiery dragons slammed into the earth, igniting a vast swath of ground. Yet despite the blazing inferno that erupted around him, Yoshida Hiro managed to slip through unharmed. Unfazed, Nathan sealed another sequence of signs and unleashed a relentless barrage of ninjutsu, his resolve as fierce as the flames he commanded, determined to press the attack until his opponent fell. Yoshida Hiro lay reeling, fresh wounds spreading across his body. The 2 special jonin, who had just veered off to dodge the giant fireball, paid him no mind and swept in toward Nathan instead. Before one of them could close the gap, he spat out several small spheres of water, part of a water escape ninjutsu, each orb hurtling toward Nathan in midair. They looked harmless enough, but Nathan immediately sensed a strange chakra signature woven into them, something that could have unforeseen effects. Unwilling to take that risk, he beat his wings and veered away. The mist special jonin allowed a trace of pity to cross his face, then spoke in a low, commanding tone, "Explode." The water spheres detonated simultaneously, erupting into a sticky liquid that splashed across the battlefield. Any shinobi caught in it would be vulnerable to its hidden properties. Nathan's eyes narrowed as he landed out of reach, murmuring to himself, "As expected, they've altered its nature." Although Nathan had never encountered water chakra that behaved like glue, he remembered reading about Izumo Shenyue's famous techniques: water style, sweet water, and water style, sweet water binding rope, which both infused moisture with incredible stickiness. The Kirigakure Jonin before him must be using a different process, but the result was much the same. All Nathan needed to do was avoid being trapped. With that in mind, he formed the seals in rapid succession and unleashed his ninjutsu. Wind style, wind blade. A silent, meter-long crescent of air hurtled forward, aiming for the Jonin's waist and abdomen. Sensing the danger, Koji Kawada twisted aside and leapt back, narrowly evading the strike. Seizing the opening, Yoshida Yingxiong shook off his daze, squared his shoulders next to his comrade, and glared at Nathan with wary intensity. But Nathan held his ground. His mission was clear: stop them, don't kill them. Earlier, Nathan had gone all out, ignoring chakra reserves, to unleash every ninjutsu he knew on Yoshida Yingxiong. His only goal was to bait the 2 Kirigakure special jonin posted below. The other mid- and low-rank shinobi were too weak to change the tide of battle, so Nathan had written them off. But those 2 elite jonin were another matter entirely. Their power could decide the fate of the Kirigakure headquarters. Feigning an intent to kill Yoshida Yingxiong was the simplest, most direct lure. Unless they completely disregarded Yingxiong's life, they'd have no choice but to spring into action. Now that they'd finally shown up, Nathan no longer needed to push himself to the brink. Chapter 510. New Reinforcements. Below, Yoshida Yingxiong and the 2 other Kirigakure special jonin exchanged knowing looks as they watched Nathan hover motionless in the sky. Without a word, they turned and sprinted toward the Kirigakure headquarters in Yujin Port. A direct fight? Impossible. They couldn't hope to match Nathan's aerial advantage, and even if they could, their priority was reinforcing the port's defenses, not chasing him across the skies. Seizing the opportunity, they pushed onward without hesitation. High above, Nathan tracked their retreating forms and murmured to himself, "So they've caught on." It was no surprise. These were veteran jonin, after all. If they hadn't seen through his stalling tactic, he'd have to question their skills. Still, he thought, even with their realization, escaping this easily felt almost too simple. Nathan willed the chakra wings unfurling from his back and, with a single powerful flap, shot forward at lightning speed toward Yoshida Yingxiong and the 2 jonin beside him. Without a moment's hesitation, he unleashed Fire Release, Great Dragon Fire technique, 3 massive fire dragons roaring from his mouth, each one locking onto a different target. "Watch out!" Yoshida Yingxiong shouted as the trio spun aside and tumbled through the air like cannonballs. Boom, boom, boom. The dragons slammed into the ground, igniting a nearby building in an instant and turning the courtyard into a blazing sea of fire. Undaunted, Yoshida, Kawada Koji, and their companions scrambled to their feet. Shielding each other, they pressed on through the smoke and flames, determined to reach Kirigakure's headquarters at all costs. Nathan frowned as he watched the exchange. So it really comes down to close combat. Long-range jutsu might slow an opponent, but if they still had the strength to push forward, they could shrug off his attacks. To stop them outright, he'd have to engage in person. With that thought, he beat his wings and shot forward, closing the gap to Yoshida Yingxiang and her team in an instant. Mid-air, he called out, "Wind style, gale wings." His shimmering feathers dissolved into swirling currents as he alighted on the fortress wall. No sooner had he landed than 7 kunai whistled toward him, an ambush meant to catch him off guard. But under the scrutiny of his Sharingan, every detail was clear. A single glance revealed the trap. 2 of the kunai were rigged with explosive talismans. Without hesitation, Nathan flicked his wrist and drew 6 kunai from his pouch, catching them effortlessly between his fingers. He stood ready, eyes blazing, prepared to turn their own surprise attack against them. Nathan's Sharingan whirred as he calculated the flight paths of every incoming kunai. Drawing on his mastery of advanced tool-throwing techniques, he launched 6 blades in a single, fluid motion. Clang! 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 Metal rang against metal as Nathan's kunai collided midair with those thrown by Yoshida Hiro and his squad. Sparks danced where the blades met, and one by one, Yoshida's kunai, including the 2 rigged with explosive tags, were deflected. With surgical precision, Nathan guided the rebounding kunai to fan out left and right, sealing off any dodge routes and funneling his opponents into a direct face-off. Boom, boom. 2 explosions ripped through the clearing in unison. Caught between the twin fireballs, Yoshida Hiro and his men skidded to a halt, their faces contorted with shock and frustration. Any thought they'd had of bypassing Nathan to storm the headquarters had been incinerated along with their explosives, and there was no turning back now. Nathan didn't pause to wonder what they thought of him. Once he'd put enough space between himself and the 3 attackers, he drew the long sword at his side. In response, Yoshida Hiro and the other 2 Kiri operatives sprang into action. There was no choice but to fight. Metal sang on metal as their blades met. Clang, clang, clang. Drawing on his Sharingan-enhanced reflexes, Nathan leveraged his extraordinary physical prowess and swordsmanship to hold his own against all 3 foes. In fact, he gradually began to tip the balance in his favor. Seizing a brief opening, he activated his earth-style, hardening technique, bracing himself against a devastating combined strike from Yoshida Hiro and the Kirigakure specialist. Then, in the blink of an eye, he deployed his flash sword technique as a feint, forcing Kawada Koji, the Kirigakure special jonin with water-nature chakra mastery, to overcommit. Before Koji could recover, Nathan thrust out his palm and unleashed a perfectly formed Rasengan. The spinning ball of chakra struck Koji squarely in the chest. A geyser of blood burst from his lips. Koji was hurled backward, landing in a crumpled heap on the ground. Yoshida Yingxiang and the other missed special jonin broke off their assault at once, darting backward to shield their fallen comrade, Kawada Koji. It had been less than 2 minutes of brutal, close-quarters fighting, yet Kawada lay motionless on the ground. Yoshida's heart sank as he knelt beside him, helpless. When he dared to look back at Nathan, dread flickered in his eyes. He had always respected Nathan's reputation, but he'd never expected a single full-strength strike to incapacitate Kawada so swiftly. The sheer force bearing down on them felt overwhelming. If even Yoshida, the strongest of the 3, could barely stand against it, then the other jonin, whose skills trailed his own, must be shaken to the core. Nathan caught their fearful glances, subtle though they were, and a cruel smile curved his lips. Without a moment's hesitation, he surged forward again. They might have tried to mask their terror, but fear shone plainly in their eyes, and Nathan was all too willing to fan the flames of their panic. Nathan charged forward again, forcing Yoshida Yingxiang and the Tokubetsu jonin at his side to meet him blow for blow. The clashing of blades rang out beneath the afternoon sky like thunder. Just as Nathan was about to land a crippling stroke on his second opponent, a kunai hurtled past his cheek. Reacting in an instant, he snapped his blade back from its follow-through and leapt away, narrowly avoiding the knife's deadly point. In that same breath, 2 figures materialized beside Yoshida with effortless speed. Nathan's keen eyes registered them as true jonin, seasoned fighters whose kunai had saved his adversary. He turned to scan the horizon and saw them, a fresh wave of mist ninjas hurtling toward the skirmish line. These newcomers were the vanguard of the second wave of reinforcements, and the two jonin now at Nathan's flank were their advance guards, arriving just in time to intercept him. As the two veteran shinobi tightened their formation around Yoshida, the distant ranks of mist ninjas surged closer, frenzied cries carried on the wind. Nathan's lips curved into a determined grin. The battlefield had just opened a new front, and he was right at its center. Chapter 511. Delay. Nathan's gaze flicked between the two, mist-hidden ninjas standing before him and the nearly 100 more massing on the far ridge. His posture tightened. This was only the second wave of reinforcements. He knew more squads would soon be on their way. With each fresh arrival, the noose around him would only grow tighter. Letting even a single group slip through could spell disaster. He stole a look behind him at the makeshift front line. A dozen Konoha shinobi, assigned to block every mist-hidden advance around the outskirts, were visibly straining under the pressure. Yoshida Hiro's new strike team had just joined the fray, and already the defenders were beginning to buckle. If those dozen warriors fell back, or worse, were overwhelmed, the entire operation at the mist-hidden headquarters would be imperiled. Until now, Nathan had convinced himself that these mid- and lower-ranked ninja posed little real threat to the larger battle. That assessment held only so long as their numbers remained small. But hundreds of them? A single squad slipping through could be enough to tip the scales. He inhaled slowly, steadying himself against the rising tide of enemy shinobi. There was no time to hesitate. If he didn't find a way to delay this second wave, and quickly, he would not only lose control of this battlefield, but also jeopardize the crucial defense at headquarters. He squared his shoulders, braced his grip on his weapon, and prepared to make his move. As the proverb goes, even ants can wear an elephant down. If the third Raikage himself could be worn to exhaustion, the patriarchs of the great clans and their subordinates were even more vulnerable. And if any one of those key figures slipped away unscathed, the entire operation's success would be in question. Nathan knew he couldn't allow that. With that resolve, he sprang backward, putting distance between himself and Yoshida Yingxiong's circle. Before anyone could react, Nathan's hands flew up. He crossed them in the Ren hand seal, channeled his chakra, and unleashed the shadow clone technique. A cloud of smoke erupted, and when it cleared, 4 identical Nathans stood ready on the battlefield. Yoshida Yingxiong, watching dozens of enemy shinobi charging toward him, shot a glance at the Konoha forces arrayed across the field, and in that instant, everything clicked into place. "Hurry! Stop him! He's stalling for time!" one of the pursuers barked. Without waiting for anyone else, he formed a sealing hand sign and prepared a jutsu aimed straight at Nathan's shadow clones. The other 3 wasted no time. 2 hurled their kunai while Yoshida Yingxiong began gathering chakra for a massive offensive technique, hoping to wipe out every clone in a single strike. Nathan, however, had anticipated their move. The instant their attacks launched, he too molded his chakra and formed a hand seal. "Earth style, earth flow wall," he intoned. Dropping into a crouch, Nathan slammed both palms into the ground, channeling a surge of earth chakra beneath the battlefield. The soil trembled, then erupted upward in a solid barrier, roughly 20 meters long and 6 meters tall, cutting off the incoming assault. Kunai and jutsu alike struck the wall, only to skitter harmlessly to the side, leaving Nathan's shadow clones protected behind the newly raised earth rampart. Despite a few cracks spidering across the barrier, none of the attacks managed to harm Nathan or his shadow clones. Yoshida Hiro and the other Mist Village ninjas had intended only to overwhelm the clones with ranged techniques, not to obliterate them with a single concentrated strike. As a result, their jutsu all bounced harmlessly off the earth style, earth flow wall, leaving the clones unscathed and free to escape. In an instant, all 4 shadow clones raised their hands and wove swift hand seals. A moment later, each was sprouting a pair of pale blue chakra wings, wind style. Wind wings, they exchanged determined nods with Nathan, then beat their wings in unison. In the blink of an eye, they rocketed upward a blistering 100 meters per second, surging over the heads of the stunned Mist Village shinobi below. Before the enemy could even draw a breath, the four clones unleashed another barrage of hand seals. Flames roared to life in each of their palms, and they thrust their hands forward simultaneously. Fire style, great fireball technique. Four colossal spheres of fire burst into being, each one like a miniature sun suspended in midair. Their searing heat banished the gloom, bathing the clearing in a blood-red light as the great fireballs hurtled toward the unsuspecting ninjas. The blistering wave of heat surged downward, scorching the mist ninjas' throats dry. Nathan's shadow clone, straining under its limited chakra reserves, couldn't form quite as massive a fireball as before, but a 20-meter sphere of flame is still formidable. And this time, there were four of them, hurled in perfect formation. Someone in the ranks screamed, "Run!" In an instant, the mist ninjas split into small groups and scattered in every direction. There was no question of erecting a jutsu barrier. These lower and mid-rank shinobi neither had the time nor the power to stop such a devastating attack. Their only hope was to dodge. Boom, 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 boom. All four fireballs slammed into the ground almost simultaneously, each impact detonating into roaring walls of flame. The fire spread outward, consuming everything within hundreds of meters and reducing the battlefield to a blazing inferno. Those weaker or slower to react found no escape. They were swallowed by the sea of fire. In the roaring sea of fire, screams burst forth like the tormented howls of demons in hell, leaving the mist ninjas below utterly stunned. Seizing their moment of confusion, Nathan's four shadow clones struck without hesitation. Ignoring how much chakra they burned, they cut down 7 or 8 more adversaries before the mist shinobi could regroup. Only then did the enemy force recover its composure, forming defensive lines and mounting an organized counterattack. But that was exactly what Nathan had planned. From the start, his goal had been to stall the mist ninjas, not to rack up kills. As long as they remained locked in skirmish, he would have the time he needed. So his clones wove between offense and defense in a deadly dance. True, their fragile nature meant a single well-placed blow could obliterate them, and that required the mist ninjas to seize a precise opportunity. Yet with the clones' extraordinary agility granted by the level 5 Wings of the Wind technique, they refused to be cornered. Unless the enemy managed to catch them flat-footed, Nathan's decoys would continue to buy him the precious seconds he needed. Nathan's shadow clones moved across the battlefield like tightrope walkers, seemingly on the brink of collapse, yet each step perfectly controlled. Their feints and diversions kept the mist ninjas off balance, giving Nathan room to focus on the real threat before him. Clang, clang. The sharp ring of steel met steel as Nathan's blade intercepted kunai hurled by Yoshida Yingxiong and another Kirigakure Jonin. While the shadow clone drew their fire, Nathan redirected all his attention to the 4 Jonin now closing in. No sooner had he sent out the clone than the quartet pounced, hoping to overwhelm him by sheer numbers. But even surrounded, Nathan refused to capitulate. He wove through their coordinated strikes with fluid grace, spotting and seizing fleeting openings to counterattack. Time and again, he turned their aggression back on them, each precise riposte proving that, despite being outnumbered, he was far from outmatched. Chapter 512. Mission accomplished and withdrawal. Ding ding dang dang. Boom. Bang. A guttural shout echoed as Nathan pressed his attack. Facing 4 opponents at once had initially put him on the back foot, but as the battle wore on, he began reading their patterns. With each passing moment, his nerves steadied, and his counterstrikes grew both quicker and more devastating. In a single, fluid motion, he blocked a twin assault from Yoshida Yingxiong and a mist-hidden shinobi. Nathan's blade, laced with wind escape chakra, whistled through the air as he twisted on his heel and drove it into the only remaining enemy. The charged edge bit deep, carving a scar so fierce it revealed bone beneath. Had the mist shinobi next to him not intervened at the last second, his torso would have been cleaved from groin to shoulder. Even so, the wound was crippling. The man's abdomen gaped with broken ribs barely contained by bloodied cloth, and his right forearm hung useless, the bones crushed by Nathan's wind blade. He collapsed to one knee, utterly spent, no longer capable of continuing the fight. Nathan sheathed his sword and surveyed the field. The mission was complete. Time to withdraw. Nathan realized there was one fewer mist ninja pressing in on him. Before he could relish the slight reprieve, a voice echoed in his mind, one of his shadow clones speaking through their telepathic link. From the east, the third squad of mist ninja is advancing. Startled, Nathan edged away from Yoshida Yingxiong and the others, snatching a moment to look eastward. Through the red-tinted clarity of his Sharingan, he made out a sizable force of mist ninja charging their way. With no time to waste, and unable to gauge their full strength at this distance, he issued a swift order into the mental channel. "Split up, take 2 clones, and stop them." "Understood," came the calm reply. The clone exchanged a glance with its 3 companions before 2 of them peeled off. They streaked east, weaving through the air toward the incoming reinforcements. It wasn't long before steel clashed and shuriken whistled in the sudden skirmish. At first, the 2 shadow clones used their aerial mobility to keep the mist ninja at bay, darting in and out of reach. But as soon as their opponents realized they were mere duplicates, the balance shifted. The enemy seized on every opening, coordinating strikes, exploiting the clones' predictable patterns, and slowly but surely began to overwhelm them. Several veteran mist ninja were in their ranks. Even though the shadow clones held the high ground, they couldn't afford to attack recklessly, so the mist ninja pressed forward at full speed. Realizing they couldn't stall the enemy, the 2 shadow clones exchanged a determined glance. They abandoned their aerial advantage, dropped to the ground, and charged straight into the mist ninja formation like knights on a suicide mission. They knew their greatest weakness, fragile bodies, would be brutally exposed against such overwhelming numbers. Still, with the Sharingan at their disposal, they could keep the enemy at bay just long enough. Seconds stretched on. The clones fought fiercely, but one by one they fell. As the mist ninja finally surged into Abaratsu port, Minato Namikaze at last received the radio call. The mission was accomplished. Yamanaka Inoichi's mind-link jutsu flared to life, flooding Nathan and the other perimeter shinobi with Minato Namikaze's voice. "Execute Retreat Plan 3 immediately." This third protocol assumed the enemy's reinforcements were upon them, though few in number, and ordered every survivor to converge at a single rendezvous before making a unified dash for safety. Other contingency plans existed, but they no longer mattered. By choosing Plan 3, anyone who failed to reach the gathering point would be left behind. Nathan could have flown away on his own, yet he refused to abandon his comrades. He needed to see them through this exit too. Seizing a narrow opening in the chaos, he spun and slashed twice with his daggers. The sharp clang of steel on a steel rang out as his blades met the incoming strikes of Yoshida Yingxiong and a Mist Village shinobi, buoying his allies with the brief respite they desperately needed. Nathan saw his opportunity and silently slipped away from the third squad of mist ninjas. As they closed in, he cast them a final glance, then turned and sprinted toward the rear, directly toward the mist ninja headquarters. Yoshida Yingxiong and the others froze in surprise. Just moments ago, Nathan had fought them tooth and nail. Why was he suddenly running away? It took them only an instant to piece it together. Without hesitating, they gave chase, determined to stop him. But before they could catch up, 2 shadow clones materialized between Nathan's pursuers and the approaching third squad of mist ninjas. Ignoring the usual restraints on chakra consumption, the clones unleashed a barrage of ninjutsu, cutting off both groups simultaneously. The advantage of having more versatile techniques became immediately apparent. One clone adapted on the fly, countering each misjutsu with a precise elemental seal. The other formed rapid hand signs to erect an impenetrable shield. Drained by their earlier battles, the mist ninjas simply couldn't break through. As Yoshida Yingxiong's team skidded to a halt, trapped on the other side of the clones, Nathan dashed on, his path to the heart of the mist ninja stronghold now clear. With his 2 shadow clones providing cover, Nathan allowed himself a moment's calm. Along the way back, he spotted a small group of Konoha shinobi trapped by Kirigakakure patrols. Without hesitation, he darted in, guiding them through the tangle of trees until they could run safely to the rendezvous point Yamanaka Inoichi had designated. When they arrived, Minato Namikaze and his squad were already there, tending to wounded comrades. Beyond them, more Konoha fighters held the line at the edge of the clearing, locking blades with enemy forces. Nathan's heart sank as he took in the scene. Roughly 1/3 of Minato's elite unit had fallen, and almost every team had sustained casualties. The survivors limped and leaned on their weapons, many nursing grievous wounds that rendered them ineffective in combat. A few worst-off shinobi slumped against nearby trunks, their breathing shallow and ragged. These weren't ordinary foot soldiers. They were the village's best, special jonin personally selected by Minato for the assault on Kirigakure's headquarters. Losing nearly 10 of them in a single operation was a devastating blow. And that grim toll didn't even account for the additional losses on the outer battlefield. Nathan realized with a heavy heart that this fight had been just as fierce and costly as the one he'd just escaped. Minato Namikaze and the elder heads of the great clans looked pleased. This battle had clearly been worth the price. Nathan stared at them, still catching his breath, when Yamanaka Inoichi, who'd been standing motionless with his eyes closed, finally opened them. His voice was flat. "There's no one else out there. We can make our break now." A hush fell over the group as everyone exchanged uneasy glances. It dawned on them that they were truly the last Konoha detachment left. Even if other shinobi had survived behind them, the mist ninjas had driven them down mercilessly. Either those stragglers had fallen in battle, or Inoichi had ordered them left behind so the mist wouldn't double back. In any case, no more allies were coming. Nathan ran a quick head count. Just over 30 of them remained, nearly 40% fewer than when they'd set out. They all knew that the next push for freedom would claim even more lives. Yet, seeing half their force still standing felt like a small mercy. They had lost much, but at least they still had a chance to see Konoha again. With a silent nod from Inoichi, the survivors gathered their strength and moved toward the forest's edge, steeling themselves for the deadly sprint that lay ahead. Nathan silently acknowledged the hard truth. Until one's individual power reaches a certain peak, sheer numbers will always be a threat. This fight had pitted quality against quantity. On paper, his team's fighters were far stronger than any of the mist ninjas they faced, but when dozens of enemies descended on them, even superior skill couldn't prevent heavy losses. The outcome was undeniable proof that in battle, numbers still matter. Chapter 513, Breakout. Nathan sat quietly, lost in thought, when Minato Namikaze snapped him back to reality. "Rizu," Minato ordered without preamble, "you're on recon. Find the weakest point in the Mist Clan's encirclement. Hai, Jiwei, you two accompany her. The rest of us stand ready for battle." A chorus of "Yes, sir," rose from the group as they all checked their weapons and gear. Neji and Hinata activated their Byakugan, eyes widening as the world around them lit up with chakra pathways and hidden foes. Neji studied the formation for a moment, then stretched out a hand and exclaimed, "This way." He bolted toward the left flank, and Minato was immediately at his side, the others close behind. At the rear, Keiichi Yamanaka tuned his mind to pick up stray thoughts and relayed every scrap of information to Minato. Beside him, Jiwei Aburame unleashed a cloud of parasitic insects, forming a living shield that would alert them to any approaching enemy. Minutes ticked by in tense silence, each second stretching the team's nerves taut. Before anyone realized it, 15 minutes had slipped away, and the breakout was about to begin. Under Hinata Hinashi's watchful eye, truly a godsend, they circled back and took advantage of the fact that only a handful of Kirito ninjas were left to patrol the area. By exploiting every gap in the search lines, they slipped past the checkpoints, dismantled makeshift barricades as they went, and finally emerged from Yujin Port. Once clear of the walls, the group quickened their pace, eager to put distance between themselves and the pursuers. A collective sigh of relief spread among them, but Hinata Hinashi, who was in the lead, suddenly braked to a stop. Minato Namikaze's voice rang out, "Hinata-senpai, what's wrong?" Hinata turned, his expression grim as he scanned their surroundings. "We may have been surrounded." The words hit the group like a cold wave. Without hesitation, Nathan invoked his wind escape, wind wings, soaring into the sky to gain a better vantage point. He'd held back on flying earlier, too risky, too conspicuous, but now that they were potentially trapped, he needed to know exactly where their enemies lay in wait. Nathan activated his Sharingan and swept the area. Sure enough, mist ninjas were closing in on them, most lingering at the 1 kilometer mark, a few daring enough to cross that boundary. No wonder Hinata and Hiyashi had sensed something was amiss. This was a calculated maneuver by Kirigakure. Having once captured a Byakugan, the Mist Village knew exactly how far the Hyuga's vision extended. They deliberately stationed their forces just beyond that 1 kilometer limit. But tracking them here in the first place wasn't magic. It was simple deduction. In their frantic escape, they hadn't bothered to erase their trail. When the Mist could find no sign of them in Yujinport, they simply followed those open tracks until they caught up. Once in range, arranging an encirclement to neutralize the Byakugan was child's play. All of this raced through Nathan's mind in an instant. He allowed himself no hesitation. Nathan swept the sky for any sign of movement, then pointed toward the east where the fog seemed thinnest. "Over there," he called down to Minato. Minato Namikaze glanced at Hinata Hyuga. Hinata activated his Byakugan, scanning the swirling mist. After a moment, he shook his head. "I can't see beyond my range. I don't know how many enemies lie ahead, or how strong they are." Minato weighed the risk and gave the order without hesitation. "All right, let's go. Move out east now." He turned to Nathan and added, "You stay above us and guide our path." "Got it." Nathan nodded and vaulted into the air, drifting just far enough ahead to point the safest route. From his vantage point above the group, he risked revealing their general location, but if the Mist Ninjas had been closing in, they'd have attacked by now, rather than methodically tightening the noose. Better to keep moving than hide any longer. Below, Minato led the way, Hinata close behind, and the other, Aris, following in single file, trusting Nathan's keen senses to keep them clear of enemy patrols. Nathan and Yamanaka Haiichi had by now perfected their long-distance telepathic technique, eliminating any worries about communication. Time passed as Nathan guided Minato Namikaze and the others, helping them set a general course. Under Hinata Hyuga's Byakugan, the team slipped past the scattered Kirigakure scouts and pressed onward without incident. Kirigakure's patrols were aware Nathan was in the area, but because he'd broken away from Minato's party in advance, they never realized the fourth Hokage and his companions were nearby. Nathan even led the enemy on a wild goose chase, sending them off in the wrong direction. Of course, Nathan couldn't stray too far from his allies. It wasn't a matter of telepathic range. His mind talk technique now worked flawlessly up to 20 kilometers, more than enough to stay in contact. Rather, it was his limited field of vision that forced him to remain within a certain distance of the group. Nightfall swallowed the landscape in shadow, reducing even the keenest eyes to mere silhouettes. As the team's lead scout, Nathan had to balance altitude with proximity. Flying too high risked losing sight of his comrades, while staying too low invited the ninja of Kirigakure to trail their every move. There was no escape from this deadly cat and mouse. Minato Namikaze and his squad raced against time to punch through the encirclement before the Mist Ninja could seal their fate. Kirigakure's forces held a clear home field advantage. Though they hadn't yet spotted Minato's exact position, they deduced his likely route and quickly established checkpoints and defensive lines just outside Konoha's outer perimeter. The only relief for the Leaf Shinobi was that Konoha's skirmishes farther afield still tied up much of their army, preventing the Mist from massing an overwhelming force. High above the front lines, Nathan hovered on chakra-propelled currents, his sharp eyes tracing every watchtower and patrol below. After a thorough survey, he radioed Minato with his intelligence. The Kiri defenses were solidly manned but thinly spread. With that crucial knowledge in hand, the Leaf team prepared to push through and pray their gamble paid off before the Mist's net snapped shut. After hearing Minato's plan, he didn't hesitate. He decided on a head-on breach. They'd chosen this path partly out of desperation and partly because it lay closest to Konoha's defense line. All they had to do was slip past the checkpoint ahead, and they'd be in the tangled forest beyond, thick with Konoha's own traps, where no Kirigakure shinobi would dare follow. Once inside, they could use the terrain to their advantage and move quickly. Fortunately, only a handful of Mist Ninja guarded the perimeter. If they struck together, they could break through without issue. A little noise wouldn't matter so long as they were fast and finished the fight before enemy reinforcements arrived. Hesitation. Changing course now, Picking a different route, or loitering, would be far more dangerous than charging straight in. Chapter 514, Outbreak. Without a moment's hesitation, everyone accepted the order and moved out. Under cover of stealth, they crept toward Kirigakure's defensive line, but as soon as it became clear their presence would be detected, they broke cover in unison and surged forward at full speed. At the front of the formation ran Dingza, clan chief of the three allied Jaludi families. Over his shoulder, he called back to his two most trusted comrades. "Shikaku, Haiichi, get ready. I'm going to activate the secret medicine." "Understood," Nara Shikaku replied, his voice calm but resolute. Yamanaka Haiichi nodded beside him. Without slowing, Dingza reached into his ninja pouch and pulled out a small medicine box. He flicked it open to reveal 3 brightly colored pills, mustard yellow, emerald green, and blood red, each one a guarded Akimichi family secret. Fingertips steady, he lifted the green pill between thumb and forefinger. "This," he murmured, "is the spinach pill. It'll unlock an extra 30% of our latent power and boost my strength to more than 3 times my normal limit. Let's bring the fight to them." With that, he swallowed the pill. Instantly, ripples of chakra flared along his limbs as he surged forward, a living battering ram ready to smash through Kirigakure's defenses. Shikaku and Haiichi fell in on either side, their own chakra flaring in solidarity as the 3 of them led the charge into the teeth of the enemy line. Nathan stood before 3 small vials, each containing a different secret elixir. Legend held that these pills could grant tremendous power if their perilous side effects didn't kill you first. 1. Green spinach pill. Its hushed reputation spoke of a trial by agony. Swallowing it meant summoning every ounce of willpower. The pain was so intense that only the steeliest of warriors could endure it. Few dared risk their sanity for whatever hidden boon this pill might bestow. Number 2. Yellow curry pill. A curry pill, unlike any seasoning in the kitchens of Konoha, this amber tablet flooded the user's body with chi and blood, effectively suspending normal life functions to extend a battle far beyond mortal limits. Yet once its magic wore off, the warrior would collapse into utter exhaustion, limbs heavy and unresponsive, an easy target for any onlooker. Number 3. Red chili pill. Banned throughout the ninja world, the dreaded chili pill could instantly multiply one's strength by 100-fold and supercharge the user's chakra so that it bloomed into a shimmering butterfly pattern around them. This explosive power surge was even said to be the prototype for the Akimichi clan's legendary butterfly transformation. But pushing the body beyond 100% capacity invited catastrophic damage. Many who tried it never lived to tell the tale. Nathan eyed the trio, heart pounding. Each promised unmatched might, but at costs so steep, he'd have to decide which price he was truly willing to pay. Even with immediate rescue, anyone who relied on these secret medicines would remain feeble for a long time, and the pills drained the user's lifespan, making them nothing more than a desperate last resort. Choza Akimichi carefully opened his medicine case and considered the 3 vials inside. He refused to touch the red pepper pill. Things hadn't gotten dire enough yet. Instead, he settled on the green spinach pill, the one with the mildest side effects. With its boost, he felt certain he could shatter the Kirin ninja's defenses in a single strike and carve an opening for his comrades to slip through. Without another moment's hesitation, Choza plucked up the green pill and swallowed it. Almost instantly, veins stood out on either side of his temples. His normally resolute face twitched, and pain rippled behind his eyes. Even he couldn't deny how agonizing the medicine was. He forced himself to inhale deeply, focusing every ounce of willpower on enduring the torment. Then, as the pain peaked, a new sensation bloomed within him. Raw, surging power that made his heart pound with fierce determination. Without hesitation, Akimichi Dingza yanked a coil of steel wire from his ninja pouch. He ripped open the seal, unfurled the wire, and pulled a sealing scroll from his sleeve. In one fluid motion, he threaded dozens of kunai onto the wire and wrapped the entire length tightly around his torso, arms, and legs. With everything in place, he gave a confident nod to Nara Shikaku and Yamanaka Hai. Raising his hands, he formed the necessary seals and activated his doubling technique. With a thunderous bang, his body's mass exploded upward, curling him into a compact spiked sphere, like an armored hedgehog studded with kunai. But Dingza wasn't finished. He triggered the technique's hidden stage, contracting his limbs and head into the core of his body, while his hair exploded outward and hardened into an impenetrable shell. His defensive power soared. Then, as though launching from a rocket engine, chakra roared from every fiber of his being. The spiked orb spun faster and faster until it shot forward in a dazzling blur, straight at the Mist Ninja's defensive line. Though it all sounds elaborate, the entire process took only seconds. Nathan stood shoulder to shoulder with Minato Namikaze and the other Konoha shinobi as they advanced on the Mist's defense line. A tense hush fell over the battlefield the moment those on watch felt Choza Akimichi's chakra spike, the unmistakable sign he'd taken his green spinach pill. Before anyone could shout a warning, a gigantic spinning meatball burst from the Konoha formation and hurtled toward the unsuspecting Mist forces. Dozens more Konoha ninja poured out in its wake, the same squad that had raided the base camp. Alarm swept through the fog-wreathed ranks. The lead Mist shinobi sprang into action, flinging kunai and unleashing jutsu at Minato and his allies. But every attack simply glanced off Choza's massive frame, leaving him unscathed. Now Choza's newest transformation, the so-called meat bullet needle chariot, charged straight into the fray like a battering ram. A Kirigakure Jonin on the front line reacted in an instant. He flashed the required hand seals, dropped to one knee, and slammed his palm against the ground. Nathan's heart skipped a beat. He recognized that motion from his own training. As the earth began to ripple and rise, he murmured to himself, "Earth release, escape and earth flow wall." With a thunderous boom that rattled the earth, a towering wall of soil shot up, suddenly cutting off Akimichi Choza's path. In his meat bullet needle chariot form, Choza slammed into the earthen barricade with a dull thud that immediately gave way to a harsh, grinding screech. His kunai sliced through the packed dirt, sending chunks of gravel and clay cascading to the base and leaving a deep, ragged gouge as proof of his force. In a swift motion, Choza shifted back into his human shape, scanning the battlefield for any openings. No sooner had he taken stock than he transformed once more, this time into the meat bullet chariot, and tore along the length of the wall. He plowed past the Mist Ninja at the front lines and surged straight into the hidden squad posted behind them. Instinctive screams erupted as Choza's hulking bulk smashed through ranks, flinging blood and flesh in every direction. Even the toughest Mist operatives couldn't withstand his onslaught. Some lay missing arms or legs, others were reduced to a grotesque pool of gore. Horrified, the surviving Mist shinobi broke and fled in disarray. In mere seconds, the battlefield dissolved into crimson chaos. The Mist's front line bristled with hidden Mist shinobi, each poised to strike. But before they could spring their ambush, Minato Namikaze and his team appeared in a flash. In the next heartbeat, nearly 20 Mist ninja surged forward, an overwhelming assault that promised ruin for any who stood in its path. Instantly, the Mist shinobi abandoned their previous target, Akimichi Choza, and swarmed toward Minato's squad. Blades whirred, chakra flared, and the battlefield erupted into chaos as the two sides clashed. High above the fray, Athan observed the unfolding melee. With a simple motion, he lifted off and hovered on a cushion of wind, never touching earth. From that vantage, he unleashed a relentless barrage of ninjutsu, razor-sharp gust blades, cascading water clones, and subtle illusions designed to fracture the Mist Village's formation. Each jutsu struck at the mid and lower rank ninja, scattering them and denying them any chance to regroup and reinforce the front lines. Their tactic was clear. Like ants wearing down an elephant, these foot soldiers might not fell legends like Minato or Choza, but every second they held the enemy occupied was a victory. Every moment of delay gave the hidden Mist's elite shinobi the opening they needed to execute their next move. Furthermore, if they can hold off the Mist-hidden mountain ninjas arriving from nearby strongholds, their impact will be even more decisive. That means Nathan must prevent those reinforcements from joining the battle. Chapter 515, Unstoppable. Nathan unleashed his next wave of jutsu without hesitation. First came the fire release, dragon fire technique, a roaring torrent of flame that tore through the mist. No sooner had it dissipated than he followed up with water release, water dragon bullet, sending a serpentine jet of water crashing into the enemy ranks. Then, shifting his stance, he activated Wind Escape, Great Breakthrough to dart through the fog, only to strike immediately with Wind Release, Windblade. Before the Mist Ninjas could recover, he layered on Fire Release, Phoenix Immortal Fire Technique, and capped it all off with the classic Art of Fireball. Caught in the crossfire, the Kirigakure Shinobi could only scatter, some weaving and dodging, others pooling their own jutsu in a desperate bid to resist, a few even trying to counterattack. But Nathan's techniques were razor-sharp and second nature to him, and with every expertly executed spell, he drove them farther back. At his side, Akimichi Choza lent his formidable support, ensuring that the lower-ranked Kirigakure Jinin on the field never even had the chance to join the Jonin-level skirmish. Because the enemy had committed so many of their Jonin to this single defensive line, when Namikaze Minato and the others pressed forward, there was simply no force left to stop them. Together, Nathan, Choza, Minato, and their allies smashed through that last barrier like a tidal wave, an unstoppable advance that left the entire Kirigakure defense in ruins. Even though Kirigakure's commanders had suspected this stretch of coastline might be Nathan's next breakout point, they refused to commit many Jonin. Two factors held them back. First, there simply wasn't enough time. Nathan and his companions had vanished so abruptly and left so few traces that the Mist's trackers could only follow in their wake, inching forward with utmost caution. Second, their chain of command lay in ruins, torn apart by Minato Namikaze and his allies. Mobilizing and coordinating the remaining shinobi had become a logistical nightmare. Yet they still dared to mount an ambush. Their reasoning was straightforward. They boasted more mid-level operatives than their pursuers. If those Jinin applied themselves, they could bog down Minato's team long enough for reinforcements from nearby Mist units to arrive. Once a critical mass of Jonin was on hand, they would spring a second, decisive assault. That scheme, however, had been utterly dismantled by Nathan and Akimichi Dingzuo, and now the tide of battle lay firmly in their favor. Minutes slipped by. Nathan hovered in the salt-laden air, wings fluttering as he scanned the horizon for any sign of renewed pursuit. Nathan crouched on a rocky outcrop, raining kunai down on the Kirigakure shinobi below to buy Minato and the others time to break free. From his high vantage point, he kept a vigilant eye on the surrounding terrain. That's when he spotted them. A small detachment of Mist Ninja racing toward their position with alarming speed. Individually, they weren't the strongest fighters, but their arrival meant the nearby Kirigakure forces had already been alerted, and more would follow if they hesitated. We can't afford any delays, Nathan thought. We have to move now. Without another word, he activated the heart-opening technique, forging a silent telepathic link to Namikaze Minato. In his mind's ear, Minato's calm voice answered. Immediately, Minato turned to Yamanaka Haiichi and relayed crisp orders to the heads of the major clans. Mobilize every Jonin and Jinin available. Clear the path at all costs. At the commander's signal, the heads of the great clans exchanged a single, knowing look, and then they surged forward at once. Nathan watched as Minato Namikaze and his squadron fell upon the Kirigakure Jonin with precision and speed. Having already endured several fierce skirmishes, those shinobi were utterly spent, out of chakra, and too weary even to mount a proper defense. If they'd been at full strength, they might have turned the tide, but there was no if today. Lear, Minato's team had fought its way to the very edge of the forest, poised to shatter Kirigakure's outer line. Now, with a coordinated strike, they crushed the enemy's elite unit, opening a clear path. The rest of the Leaf Shinobi poured through the breach, flooding into the trees beyond. With their objective secured, Minato and his officers began a fighting withdrawal, dispersing into the woodland undergrowth. Shadows and jutsu cloaked their retreat, and one by one they melted into the forest's depths. Even Choza Akimichi, a powerhouse of raw strength, made his exit in trademark style. He spun his body pirouette attack through the enemy ranks, then shrank back to human form and slipped silently among the trees, leaving nothing but rustling leaves in his wake. Nathan didn't need to land at all. With a single powerful flap of his wings, he sailed above the fleeing crowd and followed them effortlessly. Watching Nathan and his allies vanish into the forest canopy in an instant stung the pride of the Kirigakure commanders. Refusing to let them escape, they hastily organized a pursuit force and plunged into the thicket. Moments later, the forest erupted in a thunderous roar. An enormous explosion tore through the trees. Clearly, the Kirigakure shinobi had walked straight into a trap. Almost immediately, more blasts shook the undergrowth, accompanied by the distant screams of caught ninja. Faced with hidden mines and ambushes on every side, the mist forces had no choice but to break off the chase and withdraw in shame. Meanwhile, on another front, Minato Namikaze and his squad were making good use of their home field advantage. Guided by the Hyuga clan's Byakugan, they detected and sidestepped every one of the enemy's concealed traps. In a carefully coordinated advance, they threaded their way through the dense forest, maintaining perfect formation until at last, just over 30 minutes later, they broke free of the battlefield. They emerged at the edge of the woods, fully within Konoha's defensive perimeter, where the village's watchtowers and barricades stood ready to defend their home. Exhausted but unbroken, Minato's team prepared to relay their report and brace for whatever might come next. Nathan and his team paused briefly, each swallowing a few standard-issue food pills to replenish their strength. Within minutes, they were back on the move, closing in on Konoha's forward camp well before 3 a.m. At that hour, the compound was almost deserted, eerily reminiscent of the Kirigakure staging ground at Atsu's port. Unbeknownst to the mist forces, Narachiguang had deliberately sent most of his shinobi out to engage the enemy, his goal to pin down as many mist ninja as possible on the battlefield. Over there, the fighting still raged, and by all indications, it was only going to grow more intense. Their initial decapitation strike had never been intended as a single decisive blow, but rather the opening move in a larger, meticulously crafted campaign. If that first phase failed, the mission would collapse. But if it succeeded, they would immediately launch Phase 2, exploiting the chaos in the Hidden Mist's command structure to widen the offensive and annihilate every surviving enemy unit. That, of course, meant the frontline battles could not slacken. Konoha's elite warriors, the very masters Nathan had just joined, would be essential to keep the pressure on until the Hidden Mist was broken and their forces wiped out. After a brief rest, they would be sent back into battle. Nathan listened quietly to Narachiguang's orders, then closed his eyes and began restoring his chakra. Tonight's fights would be more frequent and taxing, draining his reserves and demanding every ounce of his focus. Still, he knew that once this operation was over, the Hidden Mist would fall silent for a time, not only on this battlefield, but across the entire front. Whether he remained here or returned to Blackstone's stronghold, he could look forward to several days, perhaps even weeks, of peaceful training. Nathan didn't hesitate to accept the bargain, one night of intense combat in exchange for extended calm. When the details were finalized, Narachiguang nodded and dismissed them. "Get some rest," he said. As Nathan rose to leave, he felt a surge of anticipation. The night ahead would be hard, but the promise of quiet days to come made it more than worth the effort. About an hour later, Nathan and the others received new orders and sprang into action. This time, they didn't fall back to regroup. Each was sent to reinforce a different stretch of the front line around Dinghai Shenzhen. Beneath a full, silvered moon, Nathan soared over the battlefield, the ground far below dotted with fires and the distant clamor of combat. In moments, he'd arrived at his assigned sector. Taking a deep breath, he dove through the night air toward the fray. Below him, Konoha shinobi clashed steel to steel with enemy intruders, sparks flying with every strike. As Nathan landed in the thick of it, a familiar voice rang out. "Team leader." He looked up to see Shunji Kobayashi, his deputy over the last few days and one of Konoha's special jonin, rushing toward him. Nathan's heart leapt. He had assumed Kobayashi had fallen in the earlier fighting. After all, with the Sharingan bolstering their defenses, Nathan's squad had already proven themselves second only to the Hyuga-led units. Seeing Kobayashi alive and well was an unexpected but welcome relief. Together, they braced themselves, ready to tip the scales of this brutal skirmish in Konoha's favor. Because Nathan left, the siege the Mistnin had laid on their team was the fiercest they'd encountered, second only to that titanic clash on the Eastern Front. No other skirmish around the perimeter held such relentless pressure. The fact that their opponents were still standing was testament to Nathan's prowess. Yet, looking at him now, his body scarred, his face pale from blood loss, it was clear he'd paid a heavy price. Abruptly, Nathan's eyes narrowed. Across the fray, a Kirigakure Chunin was capitalizing on Jonin Shunji Kobayashi's distraction, nodding his brow in focus as he cocked a kunai for a lethal backstab. Without missing a beat, Nathan flicked his wrist and sent his own kunai whistling through the air. Kobayashi's gaze snapped to the incoming blade. Surprise widened his eyes, but a shinobi of his rank didn't freeze for long. In that heartbeat, he registered the weapon's true arc. It wasn't aimed at him, but at something lurking behind. A flanking strike, he thought. He sprang forward, twisting his body to dodge the hidden threat, then whipped around, ready to face the assassin head-on. Two kunai met in midair with a sharp clang, then spun off in opposite directions. Nathan whirled toward the sound and immediately spotted a Kirigakure Chunin crouching low, head and tail tucked defensively beneath his cloak. Nathan raised his arms, ready to strike, but before he could move, a thunderous crack echoed against the man's chest. In an instant, a globe of fire ignited on his armor and roared outward like a living beast. The Chunin hadn't a chance. The inferno swallowed him whole. His scream split the air, a blood-curdling howl that sounded as if something infernal had been unleashed on the battlefield. Kobayashi Shunji, who had fought beside Nathan for days, recognized the signature of that fire jutsu the moment the flames flared. He glanced at Nathan just as his wings folded neatly against his back, and his arms dropped to his sides. With a soft whoosh, Nathan descended and landed before Shunji in the blink of an eye. "Team leader," he called, rising to attention. Shunji gave a curt nod and returned the salute. "Welcome back, Nathan." Nathan nodded and asked, "Have you received the order from headquarters?" Junji Kobayashi clenched his jaw to rein in his excitement. "Yes, sir. From here on, we'll fully support your plan, Captain. Our objective is to eliminate as many of the Mist Ninja as possible." Nathan allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. Nara Kimitsu had placed him in charge of the operation's second phase, which meant he now possessed the authority to mobilize every Konoha unit in the surrounding battle zones. The past hour hadn't been idleness. It was the window headquarters needed to relay orders to each front. That way, once Nathan and his team arrived, they could assume command immediately without getting bogged down in radio chatter. With Kobayashi's confirmation in hand, Nathan wasted no time. "All right, assemble your forces at once. We move out on my mark and strike the Mist Ninja exactly as planned." History had shown that without a unified command, the Mist Ninja were in disarray. Yet paradoxically, that very chaos sometimes let them hold their ground against Konoha's forces. The moment Nathan and the other Jonin commanders tried to coordinate their tactics, however, everything began to unravel. Their lines buckled, and Konoha's ninjas steadily pushed them back. All night long, Konoha pressed the attack. In mere hours, they recaptured every position the Mist had seized over the past 2 months. At daybreak, the battered remnants of the Mist Shinobi finally rallied at Yujin Port and managed to stem their retreat. Even then, Nathan and his fellow Jonin refrained from finishing off the routed Konoha troops. With their enemy now united under a single banner, total victory had slipped out of reach, and after a night of brutal combat, both sides were bleeding casualties and desperate for respite. Only then did they realize how long the battle had raged. Outskirts of Yujin Port. Inside a Konoha camp, Nathan stood on the ridge, eyes fixed on the pale, fish-belly light spreading across the horizon. For the first time since last night's bloodshed, the fury that had coiled in his chest began to unwind, leaving him with a surprising sense of calm. He'd known all too well how prolonged violence could twist a person's soul, turn them paranoid, irritable, even mad. No wonder the ninja world brimmed with both madmen and self-styled saviors. He inhaled deeply. Breathe in, breathe out. The rising sun cast gentle warmth over his bowed shoulders, and Nathan let his thoughts drift into emptiness. He did nothing but stand there, serenely watching daylight creep across the land. Minutes slipped by in silence, broken only by the whisper of the wind. Just as the sun cleared the skyline and flooded the world with light, a familiar voice broke the stillness. "Nathan, what are you looking at?" Startled from his reverie, he turned to see Uchiha Shisui leaning against a nearby boulder, wariness etched into his features. Clearly, Shisui's own mind was frayed by recent events. Without a word, Nathan offered him a small, knowing nod, and together they stood watching the dawn. Nathan shook his head. "It's nothing," he said, then quickly steered the conversation elsewhere. "So, what did you want to discuss with me?" Uchiha Shisui gave him a sidelong glance, unfazed by the sudden topic change. "We need to report our battle results." "Right, I almost forgot." Nathan ran a hand through his hair. When Nara Kimitsu dispatched them last night, he'd instructed all teams to reconvene as soon as the fighting ended. That debrief would mark a temporary ceasefire. "Okay, let's head back." He keyed his comm. "Chunin team, establish a secure perimeter and await further instructions." With that, Nathan and Shisui broke into a sprint toward headquarters. Chapter 517. 3 days later, time flows like water. Once it's gone, you can never get it back. In the 3 days since Operation Decapitation, everything has gone exactly as planned. We shattered the Hidden Mist Village's command network and, in the follow-up assault, wiped out countless enemy shinobi. Now the once bustling front line is eerily quiet. Not a single attack has come, and the enemy's defensive perimeter has been pulled back all the way to Yujin Port. Still, Commander Nara Chiguang isn't taking any chances. He's kept the veteran Jonin, who'd been shifted from the central and northern fronts on immediate standby, fully expecting a Hidden Mist counterstrike. That's why Nathan is still posted at the battlefield instead of returning to Blackstone's stronghold. Only the ninjas who attended the high-level strategy meeting 3 days ago, among them Namikaze Minato, have since departed for their respective missions. As for what was decided at that meeting, only the commanding officers and a handful of trusted lieutenants know the full details. What we do know is that preparations are already underway for the next phase, reinforcing supply lines, reorganizing our squads for rapid response, and ensuring every inch of reclaimed territory stays in our hands. The Hidden Mist may have retreated for now, but we won't give them a moment's peace. Our advantage must be pressed home, swiftly and without mercy. The council meeting wrapped up with the village elders reviewing that night's gains and losses, strategic positions secured, a handful of minor injuries, and the commendations due to Nathan and the other shinobi who had distinguished themselves in battle. Praise washed over him, but Nathan barely heard it. His mind was on one thing, the ninjutsu scroll he'd negotiated for with his accumulated merits. The elders had agreed to the trade, and just moments ago, a messenger had delivered his reward. Nathan strode to a secluded stone outcropping near the training grounds and crouched beside it. Lying there was a single scroll wrapped in protective cloth, its seal talisman still affixed. He traced the faint grooves of the talisman with his finger, an intricate symbol designed to guard the scroll's secrets until the seal was properly broken. Drawing a steady breath, Nathan let chakra gather in his palm. He formed the hand seals the village's sealing master had taught him, then channeled his chakra into the talisman. With a bright flare of light and a crackle of energy, the talisman burst into ash, but the scroll itself remained untouched. Nathan unwrapped the scroll and unfurled it carefully. His eyes widened in recognition and anticipation as he read the characters inscribed across the parchment. Water release, water breaking wave. He smiled. This was exactly the technique he'd been longing to master. With the seal now gone and the secret revealed, Nathan tucked the scroll into his pack, eager to begin practice at the first light of dawn. As a B-rank ninjutsu, this technique isn't the most advanced, yet in the right hands with sufficient chakra, its destructive force rivals many A-rank jutsu. Take Senju Tobirama. During the Fourth Shinobi World War, he used it to sever the god tree's roots at the source. And even amid Orochimaru's Konoha collapse plan, weakened though he was, Tobirama shattered Sarutobi Hiruzen's Earth Release, Earth Flow wall with a single strike. That display alone proves its potency and explains why Nathan deemed this scroll well worth the village's exchange. Nathan flipped through the parchment one last time, then brought his hands together in the Ren hand seal. With a sudden clap of chakra, he invoked the shadow clone technique. When the smoke cleared, 8 Nathans stood in perfect formation before him. Before Nathan could issue a single command, 6 of those clones peeled off, each moving to train one of 6 key skills. Fire style, burning technique; water style, great shark bullet technique; earth style, body hardening technique, the Rasengan, guardian seal, a sealing. Array 2 clones remained behind, ready to follow Nathan's orders. Around them, the other duplicates vanished into their drills, chakra sparking at their fingertips as they honed the very jutsu that had made this scroll legendary. Nathan's shadow clone pulled a worn scroll from the shelf and withdrew to a quiet corner, its brow furrowed as it began channeling lightning chakra. At last, Nathan was tackling his 5th elemental nature, lightning release. After perfecting his Earth-style Earth Spear technique, he'd earned the right to advance, but he delayed this training to carry out his decapitation mission. Now that operation was behind him, it was time to return to his studies. He'd secured the Uchiha clan's training notes and jutsu scrolls as reference materials and set his shadow clones to the task of research and practice. But the process proved far more grueling than Nathan had ever imagined. His body felt as though it were rejecting the new chakra nature from the inside out. He'd felt similar resistance while mastering water release and earth release, but never so intensely. Still, Nathan refused to relent. Even as every fiber of his being screamed in protest, he pushed his clones to persevere, determined to break through whatever barriers stood between him and his newfound power. Nathan dedicated 5,000 of the 35,000 daily chakra points he'd allotted to the shadow clone technique solely to improving its efficiency. He watched the 7th clone dissolve into thin air, then turned to his 8th duplicate. With a practiced flick of his wrist, he tossed the scroll stamped water-style, water-breaking wave to the waiting figure. "Here, this one's yours," Nathan said. The clone caught the parchment without a word, bowed slightly, and vanished on its mission. With all his shadow clones dispatched, Nathan's true body settled back into its own training regimen. He composed himself and dove straight into the Palm Immortal technique, followed by the Reflection Heart technique, 2 fundamentals he refused to let lapse. Silence enveloped him as he moved through the katas. Time blurred until, without his noticing, evening had arrived. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and dusk folded into night. Nathan completed his final set, then paused to assimilate every scrap of experience and memory his clones had accumulated over the past hour, each lesson feeding directly into his growing mastery. At last, he rose, reached out, and opened his chakra panel. The soft glow of its interface illuminated his determined expression as he prepared for whatever challenges tomorrow would bring. Nathan watched the panel light up with his newest acquisition, Water-style, water-cutting wave, level 1, 1/200. He'd only just unlocked the technique, yet he'd already mastered it. It wasn't sheer luck. His proficiency gauge expedited the process, and he'd trained in numerous water-style jutsus before, giving him a solid foundation to draw upon. He flexed his fingers, slipped into the familiar hand seals, and focused his chakra. With a steady exhalation, he unleashed a focused jet of water. The high-pressure beam struck the nearby tree, roaring through the bark and hollowing out its core in an instant. Nathan tilted his head slightly, and the water wave tracked the motion, slicing cleanly through the trunk as though it were paper. A human body offered no more resistance than that tree. He now had the power to cut an opponent in half with ease. And this was only level 1 of water-style, water-cutting wave. Just imagine how devastating it could become at higher levels, when both range and casting speed were amplified. Nathan allowed himself a satisfied smile. He'd gained yet another formidable ninjutsu. Nathan released the jutsu with a triumphant nod, then turned back to the floating training panel. He'd been hoping to awaken a lightning affinity. After all, the Uchiha clan had included 2 lightning techniques in their training notes. But once again, he'd come up empty. No matter how hard he'd focused, he couldn't generate so much as a spark of lightning chakra. "What a shame," he muttered, shaking his head. He closed the panel and surveyed the faint shimmer of chakra still circling inside him. Instead of letting it dissipate, he funneled it into refining the shadow clone technique. He'd planned to advance the jutsu today, but because he'd diverted a sizable portion of his chakra toward the failed lightning experiment, the upgrade would have to wait until tomorrow. The delay stung, yet Nathan refused to let it derail him. Gathering his remaining energy, he formed the hand seals with precision. A moment later, a flawless duplicate materialized at his side. He repeated the process again and again, each clone solid and responsive. Sweat dampened his brow, but his resolve only grew stronger. Whether it took hours or days, he would perfect both his shadow clone mastery and the elusive lightning chakra he craved. Chapter 5 at 18, Promotion and Next Steps. Time slipped away in an instant, and by evening, Nathan had already finished his final sparring drills. Without pausing for breath, he turned back to the shadow clone technique. 1 clone, 2 clones, 3 clones. Each repetition felt almost automatic. Shadow clone demanded far less mental strain than most ninjutsu, so his proficiency climbed rapidly. Barely an hour and a half later, Nathan had completed his planned training regimen. He channeled a final surge of chakra through his palms and felt the familiar rush of advancement. His shadow clone technique had leveled up to rank 6. Smiling, he raised his hands and summoned 30 dark silhouettes to stand at attention around him. At rank 5, he'd been limited to 20 clones. Now, with 30 at his command, his tactical options had just expanded dramatically. Nathan surveyed the dozen pairs of flickering eyes in the dim light. He might not need 30 clones in a routine skirmish today, but once he secured the tailed beast and his chakra reserves expanded without bounds, every extra shadow would serve as a catalyst for his power, and a step closer to the legend he was determined to become. Nathan still yearned to learn the advanced evolution of his shadow clone technique, the multiple shadow clone technique. Mastering that jutsu would be a true game-changer, practically cheating in its power. Unfortunately, his current chakra affinity and talent weren't enough to pick up such a high-level skill out of thin air. But Nathan wasn't worried. Despite being classified as forbidden, the multiple shadow clone technique exists largely to protect its users, not to limit them, so copies of its scroll can still be found in Konoha. Even more encouraging, he sensed that once he perfected the basic shadow clone technique at level 7, the advanced form would present itself naturally. Reaching level 7 from level 6 required 10,000 proficiency points. At his current pace, investing 30,000 chakra points each day to earn 200 proficiency points, he would hit that mark in about 50 days. 50 days is less than 2 months. In the grand scheme of a shinobi's life, a couple of months of focused training was a small price to pay for unlocking such a formidable ability. Nathan's mind raced as he steadied himself and activated the shadow clone technique. With a sharp crack, clouds of chakra smoke billowed outward, and every clone in the clearing collapsed into rushing energy that flowed back into his body. He opened his status panel and scanned his chakra meter, doing a quick mental calculation. After upgrading from level 5 to level 6, the cost of creating shadow clones had dropped from 6% of his total chakra to just 5%. A 1-point reduction, exactly the efficiency boost he'd hoped for. Nathan allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. Even better, the upgrade had bolstered his clones' durability. They still couldn't match real opponents blow for blow, but their enhanced resilience meant they could withstand attacks far longer than before, a definite tactical edge. With the basic enhancements to his shadow clone technique confirmed, Nathan's focus shifted. He tightened his jaw, his expression suddenly serious, ready to tackle the next challenge. Nathan drew in a steady breath, gathering chakra into his palms. With a series of swift hand seals, he unleashed wind-style, wings of wind. In an instant, 2 pale blue wings of swirling energy sprouted from his back. Nathan beat the wings in a practiced rhythm, and within seconds he was soaring skyward, leaving the training grounds far below. High above the treetops, he wasted no time. Forming a new seal, he chanted the final words of his newly mastered shadow clone technique. A burst of violet chakra smoke erupted beside him, and there stood his duplicate, complete with the same ethereal wings, hovering effortlessly in midair. Nathan couldn't suppress his grin. For months, he'd struggled to split a clone while airborne, always forced to land first and break his momentum. But now, with his shadow clone technique elevated to level 6, that limitation was a thing of the past. Together, he and his clones sliced through the clouds, free to train and fight without ever touching solid ground. It was a breakthrough that marked the true beginning of his ascent. Nathan's eyes lit up at the thought of how much this would enhance his aerial combat capabilities. Without hesitation, he ordered his shadow clone, to put the new wind-style, wind wings technique to the test. The clone said nothing, simply unfurling the chakra wings on its back and rocketing off at incredible speed. Nathan calmly released the guardian seal at his brow, activating his Byakugan to follow the clone's every move. At the same time, he used his mind link technique to remain perfectly in sync with the clone's sensations. For roughly 15 minutes, he monitored its flight, watching the wings slice through the air as if it were the original body. When he finally brought the clone back, Nathan ran the numbers in his head. The good news, the clone was able to tap into the technique's full power, just like he could. The downside, however, was steep. It burned through chakra at 3 times the rate of his true body. Pocketing that knowledge, Nathan dispelled the clone, already planning how to manage such high chakra costs in future battles. Nathan hovered in midair, maintaining the same dragonfly wing posture he'd perfected, but he could feel his endurance had dropped to barely a third of his normal stamina. Clearly, this form wasn't suited for long-range sorties. Still, that wasn't its purpose. He developed wind-style, wind wings, purely for enhanced combat mobility, not for marathon flights. Besides, this weakness wasn't insurmountable. As his mastery of wind-style wind wings deepened, the chakra cost would inevitably fall. After 4 days of relentless practice, Nathan was on the verge of leveling up the technique. But to trigger that final surge, he first needed to replenish his chakra reserves. Ever since discovering how the shadow clone technique burned far less chakra in its newer iteration, he deliberately kept his reserves lean to train more efficiently. Now, though, he could afford to bulk up. He settled into a cross-legged posture and activated the chakra refining technique, channeling his natural recovery ability. Within moments, he felt his chakra pool swell, each pulse of energy flowing freely through his limbs. Fully recharged, Nathan opened his eyes, ready to push wind-style wind wings to its next evolution. With everything finally back on track, Nathan turned his thoughts to his next challenge, developing the shadow sword technique, the final pillar of his swordsmanship system. He'd actually planned this milestone when his shadow clone technique first hit level 5. His roadmap was clear. Master the shuriken shadow clone technique, then evolve it into the shadow sword technique. At the time, though, his clones were too weak to support that kind of research, so he'd put it on hold. Now that his shadow clone technique had climbed another level, the moment to resume had arrived. Nathan rubbed his temples. There was so much work ahead, and his chakra felt worryingly low. He found himself gazing toward Yujin Port, steeling himself for another confrontation with the Mist Ninja. Chapter 519. Training in the Jungle Night had fallen 2 hours ago. The sun had slipped below the horizon, and a bright moon had risen in its place, casting pale light through the jungle canopy. Deep in this forest clearing, Nathan stirred and opened his eyes. He brought up his chakra panel to take stock of his reserves. Over the past 2 hours, the active effects of the chakra refining technique had paired with his body's natural regeneration, restoring more than 25,000 chakra points. Combined with what remained in his store, he now had more than enough to finish today's wind-style, wind wings practice. Without a moment's hesitation, Nathan formed the seals for the shadow clone technique. Instantly, a perfect copy of him emerged. The clone flexed its newly manifested wings and took off, vanishing into the moonlit treetops. Nathan watched it go, then refocused on himself. He began the Palm Immortal technique, channeling chakra through his arms and into his fists, visualizing each strike with precision and power. When he'd completed a set, he shifted seamlessly into the Reflection Heart technique, sharpening his perception until even the faintest shifts of energy in the jungle felt as clear as breathing. Time slipped by unnoticed under the silver glow. Day after day of this regimen had strengthened Nathan's body, muscles denser, reflexes keener, chakra pathways smoother. By his projection, within another month he'd be ready for his next transformation. Wiping sweat from his brow, Nathan inhaled the humid night air and plunged back into his drills, determined to seize every drop of improvement the moonlit hours could offer. Nathan's physique attribute was on the cusp of rising from 19 to 20 points, a milestone whose impact would dwarf any of his previous increases. He could hardly contain his excitement. At the same time, The evolution meter of his Mangekyo Sharingan had climbed beyond 15,000 out of 50,000, edging ever closer to the next threshold at 20,000. Hitting that mark wouldn't just prolong his use of the Heaven's Guard and Human Guard techniques. From what he'd learned at the previous checkpoint, 10,000's 50,000, Nathan was certain that once the gauge reached 20,000, his Susanoo would advance to its second stage. In stage 2, Susanoo would gain veins, flesh, and blood, all bound together by a living armor of chakra. His defense would skyrocket, and he'd unlock Susanoo's signature long-range assault, the Yasaka Magatama. As potent as an A-rank ninjutsu, it would be a devastating trump card. Although he couldn't yet unleash Susanoo at full power, the prospect of wielding such strength in the future was more than worth the wait. Nathan banished the swirl of distracting thoughts and threw himself wholeheartedly into his training, alternating between the Palm Immortal technique and the Reflection Heart technique. Time slipped by in measured breaths, each second dedicated to perfecting his form and honing his control. About an hour later, a figure materialized on the breeze and descended beside him, his shadow clone returning from its mission to practice wind-style, wind wings. Nathan opened his eyes. To his surprise, he felt a subtle surge in his own chakra. It hadn't diminished during the clone's absence. It had actually grown. He already suspected why. With a calm gesture, he dispelled the clone. In a flash of chakra-tinted smoke, the duplicate vanished, and Nathan's mind filled with the memories and insights the clone had gathered. Ignoring the flood of new training data for a moment, he sifted through the key events. As he suspected, the clone had not only refined its mastery of wind wings, but had also taken advantage of the night to launch a covert raid on a mist-hidden guard patrol at Eugene Port. Under the cover of darkness, it had incapacitated 4 guards and siphoned off their chakra. Nathan sat up straight, integrating these fresh experiences with his own awareness. The unexpected success of the mission and the chakra boost it had yielded filled him with renewed confidence. He closed his eyes and let the sensations settle, already eager to push forward to the next stage of his cultivation. Nathan felt a sudden surge of chakra flooding through him instead of waning. He arched an eyebrow at the sight, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Just like my clone to think the same way I would," he murmured. Earlier, Nathan had considered siphoning chakra from the nearby mist shinobi to fuel his shadow sword technique. Unbeknownst to him, his shadow clone had already carried out the plan. On the bright side, it saved him considerable effort. What about drawing the mist guard's attention? Nathan laughed quietly. This was a battlefield. Losing a handful of lower and mid-ranking ninja hardly warranted a full-scale investigation. These weren't renowned jonin, just expendable foot soldiers. The Mist Hidden Guard would scarcely bother sending high-level operatives after them. At most, they'd tighten security a bit. As for any hope of a counterattack, unthinkable. Kirigakure was still scrambling to restore its command structure in this theater of war. They had neither the time nor the resources to launch a meaningful retaliation. In fact, they were on edge, worried that Konoha might seize the moment to press their advantage further. In the grand scheme of things, the deaths of 1 or 2 Kirigakure ninja were little more than a ripple in the water. Nathan's plan would soon send the mid- and low-rank shinobi of Kirigakure scrambling, but that was a problem for later. Right now, he needed to absorb and integrate the training data his shadow clone had gathered. With that in mind, he closed his eyes and settled into meditation. 15 minutes passed like a heartbeat. Nathan opened his eyes, summoned his status panel, and scanned his skills. His proficiency in wind style. Wind wings had jumped by more than 70 points. Impressive progress, but still shy of the threshold for level 6. Wasting no time, he executed another hand seal and unleashed the shadow clone technique. Only this time, he split his chakra into 2 identical copies. One clone immediately resumed Windwing's practice, reinforcing the breakthroughs Nathan had just made. The other clone focused on a new jutsu, the Shuriken Shadow Clone technique, a derivative of his basic Shadow Clone technique. Mastering it would pave the way to his ultimate goal, the Shadow Sword technique. With an extra stream of chakra and 2 dedicated trainers now at his disposal, Nathan's pace of advancement would accelerate dramatically. A confident smile tugged at his lips as he envisioned the battlefield to come, and the shock on Kirigakure's faces when they realized just how far a single shinobi could break the rules of combat. Nathan watched his two shadow clones slip away, then closed his eyes and resumed his own training. He dug deep into the palm immortal technique and the reflection heart technique, feeling his proficiency meters inch upward with every repetition. Far from growing bored, he found the steady rhythm almost meditative. Hours seemed to vanish in the space of minutes. When the clone practicing wind-style wind wings returned, Nathan noticed immediately that this confrontation had ended much more quietly. The Kirigakure leadership barely blinked at the loss of a few mid- or low-level shinobi, but they'd never tolerate a blatant provocation. Had the clone gone berserk again, it wouldn't have been just another casualty tally. It would have drawn the village elders' ire and a full-scale investigation. Nathan had no wish to court that kind of trouble. From the outset, his only goal had been simple: harvest extra chakra and refine his skills in peace. Nathan was determined never to stir up trouble unless absolutely necessary. His shadow clone, endowed with all his memories and thoughts, would naturally avoid pointless conflicts, too. With his chakra reserves now stabilizing, he only needed to replenish them every day or two. There was no risk of tripping Kirigakure's security measures. A swirl of thoughts raced through Nathan's mind, but he pushed them aside and focused. Methodically, he began to absorb and integrate the combat experience and recollections his clone had amassed over the past hour. With that, today's training was complete. Chapter 520, Upgrades and New Ideas. 15 minutes later, Nathan opened his eyes. A spark of insight flickered within them. His mastery of the wind-release ninjutsu Wind Wings had leapt to a new plateau. He summoned his status panel, and sure enough, the technique showed as upgraded. Without hesitation, Nathan sprang to his feet, formed the familiar hand seal, and activated the jutsu. A moment later, a pair of translucent, pale blue wings of raw chakra unfurled behind him. Nathan turned to inspect them, marveling at how naturally they seemed to grow from his shoulder blades. Now that he'd reached level 6, every contour was smoother, every feather-like filament more refined than before. Gently, he flexed his new wings. Almost instantly, he felt lift beneath his feet and rose until he hovered just 20 centimeters above the ground. The sensation was extraordinary. What once felt like carrying a boulder now seemed as effortless as breathing. Nathan tested his balance, drifting left and right in the soft breeze of the training arena. Each shift of his weight translated seamlessly into movement. There was no awkward lag or unwieldy twitch. "My fine control has improved a lot," he murmured, exhilarated. He soared in small circles, weaving around the practice dummies and through the open courtyard. Every beat of his wings was fluid and responsive, a perfect fusion of will and wind. Satisfied, Nathan touched down and folded his wings, already brimming with fresh ideas for how to push this technique even further. Nathan tilted his head skyward. An instant later, he flexed the chakra wings sprouting from his back and struck a powerful downward stroke. A fierce gust of wind roared beneath him. His eyes snapped open, the red-tinted Sharingan locking on each limb overhead. Branches that would have blocked his path were immediately singled out in his vision. With a burst of speed, Nathan weaved through the broken boughs and shot out of the forest in a single, fluid motion. Only when he cleared the tree line did he allow himself a cautious glance downward. Those branches wouldn't have been fatal, but he certainly didn't want his face torn to shreds. He shook off the lingering adrenaline and turned his gaze back to the disturbed treetops below, still quivering in the turbulent airflow. "This speed," he murmured, astonished by how swiftly he'd cut through the canopy. Without a second thought, Nathan refocused and launched himself forward again at top velocity. In an instant, he became a ghostly blur against the sky, darting through the air so fast he was almost impossible to track. After what felt like an eternity, he finally slowed and came to a hush. Nathan hovered effortlessly in midair, tucking a loose strand of hair behind his ear as he ran through the upgrades unlocked by pushing wind-style wind wings to level 6. Flexibility came first. No need to overstate it when he just lifted that massive boulder without breaking a sweat. His chakra-formed wings now obeyed every micro-adjustment of his will, twisting and folding mid-flight with more finesse than any bird. His next metric was speed. Nathan's mental chronometer confirmed what he'd suspected. His top velocity had doubled, soaring from 100 to 200 meters per second, not quite supersonic, but on par with a passenger jet, an unheard-of achievement in the Shinobi world. He exhaled slowly, savoring the lightness that now pulsed through his limbs. For a moment, he wanted to shout in triumph. Instead, he tilted his head back and let his gaze drift upward to the luminous artificial moon hanging against a backdrop of infinite stars. In that serene glow, Nathan found all the exhilaration he needed. Nathan hovered above the training grounds, the roar of the wind buffeting his body. Even though he'd refined his wind release, wind wings to the point where he could lift himself clean off the ground, he knew he was still bound by the planet's pull. No matter how skillfully he rode the air currents, breaking through the atmosphere remained beyond his grasp. A flicker of frustration tickled his thoughts, but he banished it with a determined shake of his head. Every breakthrough began with one small step, or in his case, one powerful gust. He reminded himself of his true ambition, not merely to soar within the sky, but one day to pierce its limits and venture into the star-strewn void beyond. That dream, however, was still distant. Right now, he faced a more immediate problem: how to protect himself during high-speed flight. At his current velocity, the sheer force of the wind made breathing a struggle, and any stray debris posed a deadly risk. He needed some sort of barrier, a shield that could carry him safely through storms and thin upper air currents alike. As Nathan considered the challenge, an idea struck like lightning. What about the Jinchuriki's tailed beast chakra cloak? Could he weave his wind release around his body in a similar fashion, creating a swirling shell of air and chakra to deflect the wind's full force and stabilize his breathing? His pulse quickened at the thought. A protective wind barrier combined with his wind wings could be the key to sustained, high-altitude flight. Fueled by new resolve, Nathan tucked this breakthrough into his plans for tomorrow's training. For now, he drew a deep, steadying breath, felt the wind curl around him, and began to outline the next evolution of his technique. Wind release. Wind wings, augmented by a self-generated protective shield. Isn't that essentially a protective barrier around the host? If I could adapt it into a defensive skill, it would solve a lot of problems during flight and bolster my own protection. Why not give it a try? I already have the foundation. With a sharp clang, Nathan drew his longsword from his side. In an instant, a pale green aura bloomed around him, and the blade, a telltale sign of his instant sword technique. This layer of wind chakra slashes through air resistance and propels him forward at incredible speed. But Nathan had something else in mind. Closing his eyes, he shifted his chakra flow, pouring more energy into the field around his body, hoping to transform it into a sturdy shield. He held his breath, imagining the aura stiffening into solid defense. Again and again he tried, tweaking the chakra's density, adjusting its shape, pushing his limits. Each attempt flickered and collapsed under pressure. Still, Nathan refused to be disheartened. Every failure confirmed that the idea was sound. It just needed time, patience, and relentless practice before it could be perfected. Now that the protective instability had been ironed out, Nathan only had one question left. What should he call this new jutsu? He closed his eyes and considered. The technique drew its inspiration from the tailed beast's fur, yet served as a kind of armor, almost like a garment. Chakra feather cloak, he whispered finally, then shook his head. No, chakra feather clothes. That's it. With the name decided, Nathan released his focus on the design and delegated the next phase of experimentation to a shadow clone. He'd confirmed wind style. Wind wings was functional. Now it was time to deepen his own mastery. Planting both feet firmly on the ground, he wove hand seals and split himself into 3 shadow clones. The first clone bent its full attention to pioneering the shuriken shadow clone technique, a critical stepping stone toward Nathan's ultimate shadow sword technique. The second clone continued honing the newly upgraded wind style, wind wings, drilling the aerial maneuvers until they became second nature. As for Nathan himself, he returned to the real world to press on with his rigorous training, determined to complete today's ambitious plan. There was still far to go, and he would not rest until every technique in his arsenal was perfected. The third shadow clone, meanwhile, devoted itself entirely to mastering the chakra feather cloak technique. Minutes slipped by, and the forest grew darker with each passing moment, but Nathan pressed on, practicing relentlessly under the night sky. At last, after completing every exercise in his training regimen, he returned to his original spot, finally allowing himself to collapse in exhaustion and rest.